Hey everyone, we are back. I don't have tea today. It's too hot even for me. I enjoy the heat, but it is quite warm. I might have to turn on another fan at some point, depending on how hot it gets. And I like the heat. I messed with the audio settings a little bit, so please let me know if I'm more audible. I listened to I watched back one of my old live streams. I haven't watched any of them yet. It's a little weird to me still to like watch myself and noticed that the audio was pretty low even at full volume. So I was like, all right, let's bump that up a bit. So let me know please if the audio is improved, if I'm being if it's easier to hear me. That would explain also why previously the videos were so loud comparatively. I remember people talking about that. Hopefully that's not so bad. If I had a better mic, obviously this wouldn't be an issue at all. But we're just starting. I don't know how much we'll pursue this, so it doesn't really make sense to get a quality mic if this is just going to be a thing I put down at some point fairly soon. Well, I mean, we'll see. I don't really have plans to. I intend to just keep at this, but until it becomes obvious that I want to, this isn't just a temporary thing. I'm gonna hold off on getting the like better mic, better camera. I mean, I'm just using a little webcam, right? Yeah, I'm sure you can tell, and I'm sure that my favorite my number one fan, the troll that's always in my comments, will have comments about the quality now that I've mentioned it because he'll think he's getting me. Um, People be like that. As far as what we're doing today, uh, I was a little unsure. I was just like, we'll like we'll see if there's anything I wanted to cover. Like maybe we'll look into some news stories or maybe look through like the watch later stuff. But I actually stumbled on a better plan. Uh, oh hey Galit. Uh, is it at least louder now? Is it that was my main issue is the volume level was that at full volume it was still pretty quiet when I was watching it. I was watching it on a phone, so like that's what I mean by full volume. It's not on like not like on a desktop where you can mess with the volume a lot more. But is it at least yeah? Hopefully it's louder. All right. But as I was saying, stumbled onto a better plan. So Modern Debate had a video, had a debate between Vosh and this person I hadn't heard of before. What was her name? Sanvi Reasoning, and it was on the subject of are trans men men. And what was wild to me about it was just how much she was like an exact clone of Dr. Bogardus. Not okay, maybe I shouldn't say exact, but like a lot of her arguments were identical. And I didn't want to go over this video because while I do think that kind of argumentation style is what I'm particularly good at addressing, it was 3 hours. It was a lot of the same stuff with the same opponent, right? Dr. Baradas was debated Vosh as well, so it's like I don't want to go over the same people over and over and over again, especially with the same arguments. And for the most part, I think he just did a better job. I think there were still places where like his approach differed from mine in relevant ways, and I don't even say it made his argumentation worse so much as I think what he was aiming to do was different than what I would have, and so like I would have argued in a very different way. Is I guess what I mean to say. So I was like maybe I'll go over it. Maybe like I didn't really want like I said it's 3 hours and you see it's like 2 to 1 how long a video is for how long it takes us to go over it. So my thought was like maybe I'll like find some timestamps and just like come back with the shortened version. However, while I was looking around for what to do today, I found that of course it's like right where the chat is. Um, that same person, Sanvi Reasoning, also on Modern Day Debate, so I trust the format. Debated Hunter Avallone on the same subject. Hunter Avallone is someone I know pretty little about. The amount I do know is probably the amount most people know, which is that he used to do a lot of really right-wing content, and at some point detonated his career because he had had a change of heart, a change of mind, and no longer agreed with or believed the things that he used to say. He privated a lot of his old videos. He lost a ton of subscribers. He had a very clear, like, listen, I'm not that guy anymore. And now he's a lot more left leaning in his content and what he says. He's also like a pretty upstanding guy. Like character wise, from what I've seen of like, he'll he never like shies away. He never tries to hide that, yeah, he used to make what he now considers really harmful content. He owns up to his stuff. Very, very, very much stand-up guy from the stuff I've seen about him. I have a friend who watches him a lot, but I don't that much. As far as I know, he's not a socialist, but like he's like a sock dem or demsock or something like that. So like still much better than much better in terms of what I would agree with in terms of what he believes on that front as well. And as I understand it, he is a trans advocate as well. At least he's honest about his change of belief. Oh, you should go look into it because it is really refreshing how honest he was about it. He has a video of like, this was coming for a while, and this is going to be real bad for my channel, but I have to do what I think is right. And like, in fact, I've seen videos of him debating people who I watch from the right, and now watching him where he's like in this debate, he's standing up for trans, like for, well, I don't know, is it really trans rights? He's like standing up for he's like defending trans, he's doing trans activism, I guess, in this debate, when he's had videos about like how it's like mental illness to be trans. Like he's very honest about things. Took a pretty significant career hit to do it, which, you know, around here, earnestness, really important, obviously. And I really respect it. That kind of like, you know what, I'm gonna stand for what I believe, and you know, deal with the consequences, because it's important to hold to your principles, hold to your convictions, and it's honestly, it's like I said, it's very admirable, and that's the extent I know about Hunter Avalon. What I know about Savi Reasoning, we can just open up the video, is next to nothing. I saw her in that other debate, so I know the arguments she makes, and something that I hadn't really noticed, but my girlfriend Amazon Kane, who's in the chat, hi,
Starting right now.
noticed that she has a cross necklace, so I wonder if there's like some amount of like Christian theology that like goes into her stuff. Sometimes people wear it just because like they were raised Christian, and like that's just like it's an aesthetic thing, but sometimes it is an indication of like, no, I'm pretty into Christianity, and you know that changes how people approach stuff. Yeah, I agree. Intellectual honesty, great to see. We appreciate it around here. And on that note, as always, we're honest about our beliefs around these parts. So I know I've said it before, but yes, trans women are women, or at the very least, having watched multiple debates on this exact subject with this phrasing now with people like this, I've come to the position that this is a bad question. Some questions, like, okay, your teachers tell you there's no such thing as a stupid question. That's like true in an educational sense, but there are bad questions. Some questions are better dissolved than answered, and this is one of them, because this is a descriptive claim. And with definitions, often the answer to that is, more accurately, is this considered part of this category? So like you know, is a stool a chair is a descriptive question, and we can look at these stools and we can be like, I can ask someone like, is this a chair? And it like kind of doesn't matter what they say, right? Like, is this a chair? It has a back, it has whatever, and like some people say yes, some people will say no, but like all we're answering is whether it's considered. What is the considered a chair? What do the people believe? But we're not answering a meaningful question. This is what a friend of mine calls now what philosophy. Metaphysics is often like this, of like, okay, it's a chair, now what? Or it's not a chair, now what? I think more reasonable to ask, especially for definitions, which ought to be based in, we ought to base our definitions on utility, on what is valuable to us. We could define many things in ways that are nonsense, right? Like, you know, like I could, instead of defining this pen, well, I guess it's not obvious that that's a pen. Like this pen is one object. I can define like this as one thing and this is one thing and this, but it's not really helpful. The distinctions between those don't provide any utility, right? So we ask ourselves instead, what is useful in a definition, in any given definition? What is a value to us? And so a better question to ask instead, and if I were in Hunter's shoes, who should be in the affirmative in this case, saying yes, trans women are women, I would prefer to address the question as, should trans women be considered in the category of women? Because now we're not asking an is question, we're asking an ought question. Because I don't care, in a way, what people currently think. I care what ought to be the case. Or like, like, this is the is ought distinction, right? What is the case is way less relevant than what should be the case. And while I also agree with gender abolition, and therefore, like, well, in a sense, nobody is a woman, or I think it ought to be that no one is a woman and no one is a man. People just are, and they can be free to be themselves. And what genitalia they're born with doesn't dictate what, like, clothes they should wear, you know? In as much as we live in a society where there is gender, it ought to be the case that trans women should be considered women, and the standard for which should be altered. One of the things that I've also come to realize watching debates like this, and I'm going to front load all this so I don't have to go through it in the debate, is that the biological essentialist argument is actually founded on a myth. Because people will often say, I don't think Savi Reasoning did in her Vosh debate. She might say it here, but Dr. Bogardus definitely said it when we watched that debate, which is that the normal view has been based on that your gender is based on your biology. But that's actually not true at all. Because a lot of the things that we would consider determining factors for biological sex were unknown for the vast majority of human history wherein genders existed. Additionally, we're mostly estimating, but beyond that, usually when someone encounters another person, they gender that person immediately. It's like instantaneous. You don't even think about it. But you have absolutely no knowledge about their sex, particularly if their sexual characteristics are harder to see. If I remember right, this is actually a great example. You might look at this person, if you're familiar. Oh, let me move this so we can. Let me open it in another tab. Dang it! I just want to. Can I move this thing? Okay, whatever. We're gonna move the chat temporarily. This person, Daria Morgendorffer, from the show Daria. Yeah, I know, and it got me thinking about. You might look at this person, and I could ask you, what is this person's gender? This person named Daria Morgendorffer. Oh, you were? That's pretty funny. Yeah, I was just realizing, like, she's a great example for exactly this. Okay, I want to have this image centered. All right, let me. Okay, I just want the image. Cool. You might ask yourself, like, what gender is this person? And most of us, without hesitation, would instantly be like, oh, she's a girl or a woman, right? You'd say, like in this case, a girl because the people were like, oh, it's adult human female and she's still in high school, right? But how do you know? Right? Like if it's just based on sex, right? Like how do you determine her sex? She's wearing clothes that cover up a lot of her sexual characteristics, right? You can't see if she has breasts or wide hips or whatever. What characteristics could you possibly use to determine her sex? You don't. What you actually do when you identify a person's gender is you look at gender characteristics, because these two things are different. And you see, oh, she has long hair. She's wearing a skirt. Her name is Daria. Those things have absolutely nothing to do with sex. Those are gender identifiers that you presume she that she displays because she was assigned female at birth, but that she doesn't have to be. There's no way of knowing. This is why there's been a lot of discussion about whether Spider-Gwen in the new Spider-Man movie, which was very good, is trans, because there's some like small stuff in the background that you can see, but ultimately the gender signifiers are all you really have to go off of. You don't really have access to sexual identifiers, and so it's like this open question. Now, in that case, I don't really have much of an opinion. That's not the point. The point is that we don't use that the sexual that the biological sex model is not accurate. It's founded on a myth. We don't use sexual identifiers whatsoever. We gender people based on a vibe. This like what that vibe is changes a lot, because I mean, as is well worn, because there have been a lot of changes to what has been expected of men and women. This is a reasonable example. It's hard to see, but like I was trying to find, or maybe maybe instead of medieval, I want like French aristocrat. I just want like the cliche. All right, high heels and tights was a manly ass thing to wear for quite a while. If you wore this now, people would not think that's terribly manly, but you know, back then, this was what men wore. This was the gender signifier. These things change. That's not really important. I just want me to remind everyone, you know, like, good luck telling this guy he's not a man and keeping your head after. That's all I'm saying, you know? So yeah, like the biological essentialist model is based on a myth. Ultimately, we don't use sexual characteristics whatsoever. And so I just want you to remind that, like, when someone says that, like, your sex should determine your gender, they are as much making an ought statement as I am when I say that no, it shouldn't. And they would have to justify their ought position just as much as I would. Whereas the merely descriptive discussion, well, you just take a poll, how many people think trans women are women, and then boom, you have your answer, like, as to whether they are. But I don't care whether they are, I care whether they ought to be. And I think they ought to be for a lot of good reasons, and we'll get to those during the debate. But just remember, like, that changing the question that way also requires that someone in Sanvi's position needs to justify their position instead of just relying on it as the default, because it's not. It never has been. What has been the default has been that vibe, and it doesn't work. It has a lot of really obvious failings. Like if you encounter something like, I hope this isn't like, I hope this isn't like mean to do, but like, if you look at like some very butch women, a lot of the gender signifiers you might look for don't necessarily tell you what their gender is. But you know what does? Every single time, knowing what they identify as. Literally everyone identifies as the gender they are. Even no matter like the only way you like, I guess if you're like a biological essentialist, you can be like, well, no, if you identify as a woman but you were assigned male at birth, then like you're wrong. But like but using that, but you never have any ambiguity if you accept the model, the self ID model. You never have any concern. If this person tells you whatever gender, you know, like if they tell you're a woman, cool. If they tell you they're a man, cool. If they say they're non-binary or whatever else, fine. Oh, and before I forget, there's also another flaw in the biological essentialist model, which is that gender does not work the same in all cultures. And there are several cultures, I know of at least two. India, they have Hydra, and some Native American tribes had two-spirit people where both have a third gender tradition. Clearly, that's not biological. And Sanvi would have to say they're wrong. Their categorization is incorrect and provide reasons why why they are wrong, and not just that you are asserting your cultural preference over that, right? That's something you always have to consider, is that when you have these cultural things, it's like, why is your culture correct in how it approaches this thing as opposed to this other one? And it becomes a little obvious how like repugnant that is, and how like well, I maybe bigoted is the right word. That would be. So with all that preamble out of the way, I know we've talked about this a bunch, so it's like kind of funny to like me go over it again. But I had more thoughts about it, and hopefully they're helpful. Oh, we got a long way to go, so we should get into this.
Hunter's opening statement.
All right, Hunter.
Thanks so much for being here
What you got?
Us, Hunter, the floor is all yours.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I'd like to say thank you so much, James, for having me on, and Svani, thank you so much for initiating the debate. I think this is going to be really interesting. I figured I'd go ahead and just start with giving my definition of a woman, and then I'll kind of just read my general opening. So the definition that I like to use is a woman is someone whose internal perception of themselves aligns with what we culturally view as being feminine. So gender.
I like the attempt here at that definition. I think this avenue of approach is a really interesting one, where he basically what he's trying to do is, often the people like this we saw in the Dr. Bogardus debate, right, that they'll come up like, well, what do we mean by what is a woman? Like, you have these issues with circularity and whatever else. I don't think those issues are real issues, but Hunter attempts to circumvent all of that by, here's a definition that requires none of it. The problem I have is, well, what our other tab is. There are a lot of women who don't really conform very much with what is considered feminine. They're still legitimately women, and authentically women. Additionally, there's to some extent, there's amount with gender roles, there's a reciprocity, or it's like a kind of a back and forth as to what it means to be like that. It reminds me a lot of, if you're familiar with linguistics, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which is that a language impacts how a culture views the world, and the way a culture views the world impacts how the language functions. It's reciprocal in that way, and the same is true, in my opinion, with gender. In as much as I am a man, I define manhood by being a man, and also defy or fall in line with the expectations, of men to varying degrees. There's some amount of my character that is shaped by what I am expected to be, and some amount of what I am expected to be that is shaped by my character. In some way, this is how people can kind of redefine masculinity, or redefine what it means to be a certain way. It's the sillier version of this is that Ron Swanson quote where he says like, well, I'm an award winner, so any attitude I have is an award winner's attitude. Like, in a way that's correct. But the problem, of course, is that in this particular case, that femininity is not the totality of like womanhood. The problem is it's like trying to encapsulate the vibe. It's a good effort. I think it's a good attempt. But it does open you up to like, well, does that mean butch women aren't women, or like, but in a way, butch women are defining in part what it means to be a woman, or what it can mean to be a woman, by being women who are butch, like that they're defining their own category by their existence in it. This is why I do prefer instead that, it's identifying with the category, with what with all the nebulous and various expectations and associations assumed with that category, and femininity doesn't quite encapsulate it.
Obviously,
but it's a good attempt.
So that means we as humans created expectations, behaviors, and roles that we assign people based on their biology. So we've chosen certain behaviors and roles to be correlated with biology. But many, if not most, of these expectations, roles, or behaviors are actually socially constructed.
That's a great point.
For example, the go-to example
great argument.
Is, of course, there's nothing biological about women wearing dresses or men wearing suits. In fact, throughout history, kilts and tunics were all seen as masculine attire, despite tunics being a kind of a dress, and then kilts being really a literal skirt. So this further demonstrates that people with penises don't choose to wear suits because of some genetic or biological reason, but rather we as humans have correlated certain behaviors and expressions with biology.
So one of the things that just happened there, I think, is an unfortunate consequence of how anti-trans debaters approach things. Is it's so difficult to know exactly which angle they'll come at you from that you kind of you're incentivized to add in stuff that they probably won't say. I've seen Sanvi debate once. I don't think we should it seems really unlikely that she'll argue anything like, "Oh, it's biological what clothes you wear." It doesn't seem like the thing she would ever say, but some number of there's a very loud, I think, motorcycle going by. Hopefully you didn't hear that, but it was very distracting for me. Uh, but like if you don't know that she's not going to say something like that, I was like, well, some number of people will, so like let's get that out of the way, so I don't have to spend 10 minutes arguing with you about it later.
And this is really important because gender is more than just a social construct, it's also a socially constructed form of identity. So the external social construct of masculinity and femininity influence the way that we see ourselves. We collectively agree on certain characteristics we label as masculine or feminine. And in shorter terms, the external social construct of gender influences our internal gender identity in regards to that external social construct.
I guess this is I guess what he's saying is a little bit of what I was saying before, right? Like we both define and are defined by that category that we associate ourselves with. Oh, I just noticed someone in the modern database chat going as Kilgore Trout, a Kurt Vonnegut character. I was like, oh hey, I know that guy. If I'm not mistaken, it's supposed to be like a joking reference to Theodore Sturgeon, a prolific writer who I've read very little from. Just a neat little like, oh hey,
a good
someone going by
example is
that name.
something like even like the game of football. It's socially constructed. It exists as a result of human interaction. And even more so, the foundational social construct branches out to socially constructed football teams. And so now, because of this external social construct, I can now have an internal identity as, say, a New York Jets fan or something. I don't ever even have to attend a football game to actually be a fan. Maybe I just like the team because my dad liked it before.
Yeah, I remember that Amazon came. But yeah, I like what Hunter's saying. This is I think fandom is actually a really good example. Yeah, you could never attend a Giants game and still be a Giants fan. I think you said the Giants was the team you mentioned. What it means to be a fan is you can never attend, you can never watch, but you can like you don't have to be from the city. You might just really like them. When I was like 3, I was a Dodgers fan. And it's like, well, not because I knew what the Dodgers were or what baseball was or why I should like them or what other teams were. It was because my family were like my family that like my grandfather came from Brooklyn when they still lived when they were still there, and it like kind of just like your family talks about it enough, you're like, yeah, Dodgers. I don't know what the hell Dodgers are, but like yeah, and like I was a fan, and would you like to in the corollary, it's like the anti fan activist. I don't know how to put it, but someone in Sanvi's position for the equivalent would they say like, no, you're not a fan because like there are these requirements that you don't meet. Well, that's just not how people work.
There's no way to verify the legitimacy of this identity. And I understand that this analogy might sound a bit unserious, but I
think it's actually a very good analogy. Reminds me of music snobs in high school who insisted you had to know every song.
I think the most prevalent example is
yeah. That's the joke Amazon that people have, right? Amazon came over like you're a Beatles fan, name every Beatles song. Like, oh, well, what if I like 3 of their songs but I really like them, like I've only heard 3 of their songs but I really like them. Is that not being a fan? Yeah, exactly. It's a good point.
Christianity. According to Romans, to be a Christian, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you confess and are saved. This demonstrates that the internal belief influences external behavior. So similarly, someone might have an internal identity as a woman, and this
Oh, you might. By the way, as like a note about the like Christian reference here, not only is that like is it a reasonable argument in itself, he might be aware that in her debate with Vosh, actually, which might have happened after this, so never mind. But never mind about like his expectation. But she expressed some ideas like to be requisites for being a Christian are things like are like believing in the Trinity and being a monotheist, and it's just like whoa, what the hell is this, right? Like there are a lot of Christians that don't believe in the Trinity, and like it's kind of wild and kind of arrogant to be like, no, they're not Christians. I'm the one who knows what being a real Christian is, and if you don't believe in the Trinity, you're not one. Now I know Christians do this all the time. People of a lot of faiths do this all the time. This is why you get schisms. But uh, like from the outside, right, from where I'm sitting as an atheist in particular, like I don't know if you like that Jesus guy. Seems like you might be a Christian. And honestly, like from the outside, Christians do not look monotheist to me. They pray to a lot of things that aren't one God, you know? Especially if you're not a Trinitarian, right? If Jesus and God are separate, that's two gods. But also I remember hearing about a poll done in the Vatican, in Vatican City, you know, the seat of Roman Catholicism, where they asked people like in an emergency, who do you pray to? And like Jesus was 17th on the list or something like that, because there are all these saints and whatever else, and there's a lot of like stuff built on top of it. So like monotheist is a little iffy for Christians. It's not really relevant, but it's just one of those like because of the other debate where she was going on about this, was reminded.
Justifies their external expression. It would be silly to expect someone to, quote, respect your pronouns if you're making no attempt to externally present your internal identity. However, the external presentation is not what holds the weight and ultimately justifies the identity. So to be a Christian, you must have an internal belief. In order to be treated and recognized as a Christian, you must express certain behaviors and characteristics.
So, I agree, but it does imply a little bit that if you don't pass as a trans person, then it's unreasonable to expect people to treat you as your actual gender. I don't know if that's entirely accurate. I know that people will struggle with it, but if you don't pass or even like change how you present at all, you should still be entitled to be, treated with you're like if you tell people what your pronouns are, they should use those pronouns. That like it should be that simple. I don't think that he necessarily disagrees with that, but that seems to be an implication of what he just said.
Ultimately, it's the internal belief that justifies their identity as a Christian. Behaviors are not required, but if you're legitimate in your Christian faith, you will most likely strive to meet certain characteristics. Similarly, if someone is legitimate in their identity as a woman, it's more than likely they'll strive to meet certain external characteristics. And most people end up being
but also simultaneously, as he didn't draw back, but like was, as he mentioned before, in some way define what those characteristics ought to be
with their internal gender identity, but they may not fit into certain social roles all the same, or certain social expectations. So like many gender expectations, of course, another cliche example, right, is the man working, the woman staying home, but yet many women aren't happy as primary caretakers, and women have also brought unique benefits to the workforce and have thrived outside of their gender role. There's also been an increase in stay-at-home dads, as men are also proving to be successful outside of their gendered expectations. Had these people been forced to uphold elements of the socially constructed gendered expectations, they would suffer from discomfort and mental health issues. So while for some people deviating from socially constructed gendered expectations is enough, others have persistent discomfort and mental anguish due to the misalignment between the external gender expectations and the internal gender identity, which leads to dysphoria.
I'm mostly pausing here because like I don't really have much to say about Hunter's opening. It seems pretty good so far. I feel a little bit like I'm just like content stealing. There's just not a whole lot to say. If you're following it, which I trust you all to do, it all makes sense, and I think they're like reasonable arguments. There's not a whole lot to say about it. We're mostly gonna have a lot of stuff when it gets to Sanvi and the back and forth. And this is just kind of how it is when you agree with an affirmative position. There might be like interesting arguments, but for the most part, you've heard these things before, you agree with them, there's not a lot to say. That's fine. And you can appraise some of the details like we did earlier of, there's a little bit of an probably unintended implication that passing is a requisite for being treated as your gender. I don't think he meant to imply that. And whether he did or didn't, right? That is incorrect. But other than that, there's not a whole lot to talk about.
So not only do conventional gender expectations seem to be inaccurate, they're also leading to some harm. Now, an adult human female is the commonly cited dictionary definition. This is the classic definition that aims to uphold the definition of woman as being biological, hence adult human female. However, we know that sex is bimodal, meaning it's not a rigid binary as previously thought.
Also true.
So it doesn't easily fit into two specific categories. That means that attempting to define woman as fitting a biological criteria leads to actually excluding people who you would otherwise consider women. So maybe we're going to say chromosomes determine gender. That's obviously a biological thing. If so, it's possible. How is it possible that there's 1 in 15,000 quote girls in Denmark who are born with XY chromosomes? They're raised as girls, believe themselves to be girls, and have primary female sex organs. But if female includes female chromosomes, then the biological definition of woman would currently be excluding people who have female sex characteristics.
And this is a good thing to remember, is that these divisions that we make through things like categorization and definition, these are things that we do to help us understand the world. And when I say us, I mean people, to help humans understand the world. Because ultimately, nature doesn't I wish I knew who said this quote originally, and I'm paraphrasing. Nature doesn't operate in binaries; it operates in spectrums. There just is what is, and we draw lines around them to understand it better. Another example that I had thought of previously was we have this concept of continent, right? Actually, this might be the best map for it. We have this concept of continent, and we say, hopefully, and we say that like North America ends, actually Europe's a better example. Well, without the lines and without my cursor, it's gonna be hard to say. Much better. Perfect. All right. And we say Europe is here, right? This is an approximation. But like, would it be wrong if we changed that to include like the Saudi Arabian Peninsula? Right? Would it be wrong categorically to change what we consider as part of Europe? Well, only if it would be provided more or less utility as how we look at the world. It wouldn't be an incorrect, like we wouldn't have failed to understand a precept of the universe. We would have had a different method of categorization, and it wouldn't have been incorrect. It would have been simply different. And I forgot why we got to this, but like it like that's why like a lot of these categorizations. Oh yeah, because we were talking about like biological sex, like where things start and stop, and like what things are included in categories needs to update constantly. There's a little bit of a like, I feel like this kind of approach wasn't really possible before the ubiquity of tools like dictionaries. Because remember, like 400 years ago, it wasn't a dictionary just handy all the time. But like people can look at the dictionary and be like, this is what it means, and there's no way you can deviate from it. But like a dictionary isn't like a divine arbiter of cosmic truth about definitions. It is the approximation of how people use the words. But these words need to be updated constantly to better suit what we mean by things and better apply utility. Some words didn't mean what they used to mean, and some words mean more or less or whatever. And like, it's fine as long as we get utility out of it. That was the main problem with the word literally being used so much that it became usable as though it's meant figuratively is now you've lost utility, because when you say I literally did like I literally died or whatever, or maybe died, or like I literally fell on the floor laughing. Do I mean literally or figuratively? And we've lost utility, and that was the problem. Not that it was incorrect, but like the utility was harmed, and we gained more utility by understanding that trans people are the gender with which they identify. There's more utility in an identification-based model than there is in the previous like vibes-only model and the prescribed biological model.
Furthermore, it's estimated that up to 1.7% of the U.S. population has an intersex trait, adding up to 6 million Americans. If the definition of woman includes female, as in specific sex characteristics...
Yeah, at a minimum, by the way, like the existence of intersex people should require that people like Sanvi say that there are, at a minimum, 3 genders. There's men, women, and intersex, or maybe non-binary, because clearly the intersex people are not definitively one sex or the other. There isn't a binary there. But they don't say that, and it's kind of telling.
Many of these characteristics must be met in order to be a real woman.
That's actually a good challenge to pose to someone like this, is like, okay, what gender are intersex people?
Women who went through menopause. Obviously, they don't just cease to be women. Are women generally of the essence to give birth, but the biological definition still allows for women who cannot give birth? If so, why can't this exception also extend to trans women?
And we're seeing here kind of what I was talking about before is, and I do like how he's approaching this. He's rattling off all these counter arguments to things people often say, because like it's hard to like just present an argument and then be open to the 1,000 nonsense avenues that people come back with, just like, no, that's obviously stupid. Like, let's like just fire it off. Like, no, like when people say, oh, it's of the like essence to give sex, but like maybe they don't have to, right? Because this is a common phrase of the it's just a great way that Vosh put it was like how every argument goes is like, oh, a transphobe, all women have this. Okay, well, some trans women or some cis women don't have this. Okay, but that's so like trans women are like that and they don't have this. Well, that's different. Why? Well, because all women have some other thing, and you just keep going down the list. And so it started with, oh, well, women can give birth. Well, not all women can give birth. Well, they're of the category of the type that could possibly give birth. Like, okay, like what do we even mean anymore?
Is it because perhaps trans women don't have the female sex organs necessary to give birth, thus negating her childbearing essence? Well, 1 in 5,000 women are born in the U.S. without a uterus. That adds up to 1.6 million women in the U.S. who are still women, despite lacking the very essence to give birth.
And if you add all these groups up, well, first of all, each of these groups individually should make it clear that it's non-trivial. But if you add these groups up, it gets to be like very large groups of people. Like not the kind that you shouldn't be sweeping any of these groups under the rug. But like especially in totality, it becomes very hard to just ignore. But people like this have to.
One could argue that a woman is simply someone whose biological makeup is geared towards producing large or small gametes. This definition would exclude women who suffer from a condition called Swyer syndrome. These women have fully functioning female sex organs except for ovaries, meaning that although it's rare, there are some women who we still recognize as women, yet they lack the essence to give birth, and their body is not geared towards producing gametes.
Yeah, which is why, like, at the end of the day, the previous system was, we assign you a gender based on the genitals we see on you at birth, and you are expected to conform with gender expectations, not sex expectations.
If the biological definition somehow makes an exception for women with these conditions, then why can't the biological definition make an exception for trans women who've undergone sex reassignment surgery? They don't produce gametes, nor do they have a womb, yet we already recognize certain women as women, regardless of their biological ability to give birth or produce gametes.
And sex reassignment surgery is a huge problem for people with for transphobes in general. This is why we've gotten to the point where like J.K. Rowling is posting that like women are the large gamete producers or whatever, because they wouldn't have said that they wouldn't have said that if they didn't have to. Like the general determining factor used to be like, oh, if you have this genitalia or that. But the fact that trans people sometimes do get bottom surgery and sometimes do have the genitalia expected of the sex associated with their gender means that they can't just back up to this, and they have to find these really weird things to, like, oh, it's the large gametes or whatever, because ultimately that was the thing I did leave out of the model that had been used previously, is that, while people would look for gender signifiers, yes, if they took off your clothes and you saw genitalia they didn't expect, they would go revert back to the genitalia based assignment, but that doesn't exclude trans people anymore, not in their entirety, and that's a problem for the anti-trans like debater.
As soon as these questions are asked, attempting to define a woman based on biology starts to crumble. This definition would exclude millions of currently recognized women who have intersex traits, cannot give birth, or don't produce female gametes. Finally, even when it comes to the practical side of things, we don't really look at biology to determine if someone is a man or a woman. We look at the way they express themselves and behave. We determine who is a man or who is a woman on the basis of gender.
Yep.
We already do this
Agreed.
on our daily lives. So in short, defining a woman on the basis of biology excludes real women from the definition and doesn't serve utility on a day-to-day basis. External social constructs exist and can influence internal identities. The internal identity is ultimately what holds the weight and influences external gendered behavior. Thus, defining a woman based on internal identity allows for a more encompassing definition and serves more utility. Definitions are descriptive. We make definitions in order to better categorize and understand the world around us. Definitions can, should, and do change as our understanding of certain concepts evolve.
So, I mostly liked Hunter's opening. This is, again, the value of a pre-written opening coming out here. He made sure he hit all the arguments he wanted to. He hit most of the ones that I think were relevant to. I think he could have been a bit more clear about that last bit at the end. I think he could have spent more time on it if he had the time to spend. Oh, what did he just say? There was something I forgot I wanted to.
And do change.
Oh, yeah. So, like, I agree that, like, definitions do, like, update and change based on our improved understanding of the world, but something to remember also is that for social definitions, things that exist exclusively as constructs in human societies, which gender is one of them, but they're, well, I guess they're, like, pseudo-gender roles and other, but, like, really, when we talk about gender, it's a human thing. Or, like, money is another one, like, if humans went extinct tomorrow, the concept of money would go with us. There are a lot of things like this. It's not that we find out that we're wrong about what this concept is, so much as society changes, what the words mean changes, what the ideas are change, and we move on from this. And like we update our understanding and the terms change. Slaying is a reasonable way of seeing this in action. I'm trying to think of better examples, but like, we say, oh, that's real bad. That's really bad. Oftentimes that means good. The meaning of the word changed as like society updated and changed how it viewed things. I know there are other words that like definitely, like graceful is a really good example. Like, let's look up the definition of graceful. Yeah, so like having or showing grace or elegance. So already, Sanvi, why are you not getting mad about this kind of thing? Because you're the kind who gets mad about like circularity and definitions. The word grace is in the definition of graceful, but elegance, gracefulness and elegance are often synonyms now, and they seem to make it makes sense that they mean the same thing or whatever. But like to be full of grace in a Christian sense, which is where I'm guessing this word came from, means to be full of like God's grace, and the concept of gracefulness of like God's grace is like really a really nuanced one that I'm certain I don't understand in its totality, so I'm not going to try to describe. But clearly that word changed as society changed how it approached what it should mean and what we expect from this term and things like that. These words move, and it's not that we're incorrect now about what graceful means. It is that that we updated our understanding as we like discovered a new thing of like, oh, actually, grace means elegance too. No, it's just that like what society expected of what it meant by gracefulness updated and changed as the society changed, and as it became clear that the word graceful was no longer used exclusively to mean full of God's grace, dictionaries and definitions would need to update and include that it is used to mean elegance, right? Or having or showing elegance.
Of certain concepts evolve. Thank you.
You got it. Thank you very much for that opening statement, Hunter Avalone. And if it's your first time here, folks, at Modern Day Debate, I'm your host, James. Our goal is, you don't want...
Yeah, I know. Love you, James, but we're going to be here long enough if I don't wait. Oh, she's got her PowerPoint. Yep, that's the other thing. She has a PowerPoint. Dr. Bogardus did too, but like, here we go, you know. Okay. Listen, I try really hard to not come after people as people, but I will say, having the trans women are not women PowerPoint in your Google Drive, I wouldn't describe that as very particularly normal behavior. I'll just gonna say that and leave it there.
So today I'll be arguing that trans women are not women and the case for the truth of this proposition.
I noticed the first person only negated the things that people use to define women because they aren't valid for all women. Is his point that woman isn't a useful description, or does he have his own definition? So you might have popped in a little bit late, Peachy Keen. He started with his own definition, but part of the difficulty of this is that when you argue that trans women are women, you're arguing against a lot of cultural inertia, and that's kind of a necessity of. So, like, yes, you would expect a lot more offense in his argumentation of, like, here are proactive reasons why, yes, it should be like this, but ultimately, he has to spend a lot of time, like everyone does. It's kind of inevitable that you have to spend a majority of your time arguing against the cultural inertia and like the slew of things you're expecting to hear. He did present his definition at the outset and gave a good argument, as at least in my opinion it was a good argument, as to why it makes sense to approach things in that way. His definition was more or less that like a person is someone who like who identifies with the category that we assign to like femininity broadly. I'm paraphrasing a bit. There's an issue, I think, with the femininity part, but ultimately it's like he's saying a similar thing to what we've seen previously, which is that a woman is a person who identifies with the category and associations we have towards the gender role that had generally been assigned to females that we call womanhood. That's a pretty good way of approaching it, because again, we're trying to like avoid the word in the definition, so people like this don't lose their mind. But additionally, he pointed out that for things like Christians, your being a Christian has a lot to do with internal belief, and that's the thing that makes you a Christian. Whereas that will express outwardly in order for you to be recognized as such, and that is by things like identifying as such. So he said at the outset, you might have popped in late and not seen it, because you have to spend so much time dealing with the nonsense, and we're gonna get another like slideshow of nonsense in it, like that doesn't fully overlap with what Hunter was addressing.
So right off the bat, two arguments that women are in fact adult human females is, firstly, we have adult females for other species. We refer to.
So this argument is garbage. I don't understand why people say it like it makes any sense. I'll let her say it, and then we'll come back to it.
And an adult lion that's a male as a lion. It would be quite astounding if we looked at the other species that we study and had terms for adult females there, but not for our own, which is the species that we clearly study the most.
So this is absolute nonsense. We don't have words for all adult females of all non-human species. Like, what's an adult male worm? Does anyone have a word for it? I don't know if or an adult male like ant or beetle. Do we have a word for that? We don't, right? It's nonsense. And even if it were the case that literally every other animal, okay, so that has utility for us because there are not gender roles that are relevant to us in these there in other species. There are gender roles in humanity that are different than simply your sexual your what sex a person is. So like this is absolute nonsense, and it's wild to me that this is the first argument that she drops out. Ant soldier. Well, no, hold on. Is every soldier ant male? And is every male ant a soldier? I'm not sure that it lines up like that. Because if it were soldiers and the queen, that would be the flip side. Then literally there's only one female ant like ever. Like ants have 3 genders: soldier, worker, and queen. Yeah, so that's what I mean. Like maybe like some of my examples aren't like maybe there might be a word for it, but like you get the point. Is that a lot of these terms a lot of these categories don't have this. So like, you know, you might have like goose for geese, you have like the goose and the gander, right? But you might not have it for another species. So like, are there words for adult male eagle and adult female eagle? I don't know about that. You know, like even it would be wild to me if literally every species that has a sexual divide has words for that. Like, what's an adult male seahorse? An adult female seahorse. I don't think there are words for that. And like even if there were, those aren't gender words. Those are sex words. And we do have, by the way, as it turns out, there are words for the males and the females of the species. You want to know what they are? Males and females. Sea stallion. Maybe. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised. That's pretty funny. Maybe seahorse was a bad example. I was just going to go to a fish, right? Like, what's an adult male? A clownfish, whatever. Like, but so I was like, oh, seahorse, because that's the one where the males give birth or whatever. But, okay, that's kind of funny. But you get the point, right? Like, these aren't gender words. These are sex words. And, okay, if you find that humans are lacking it, we can make new words for that. But that is not what man and woman have ever been.
So the word
nor
woman is,
should
I
they
think,
be,
the best
right?
candidate.
Remember, while this argument is being discussed as a descriptive argument, it ought to be considered in the context of being a prescriptive argument. What should woman mean? Should the category of woman include trans women? And Sanvi is also would be saying no to that. Of course, what's unfortunate here is that, like, we're not actually talking about it in those terms, at the very least, not consciously. So she's not going to be trying to address those concerns. But when you think of it in that way, it becomes obvious why these arguments fail. Also, I just realized there's kind of a if you're gonna have a yes no question as the topic of your debate, you should probably give the first billing to the affirmative. Like, I don't know how they figure out who goes first in this like versus thing, but like Hunter is speaking first. He is on the affirmative. Shouldn't it be him then versus the negative? It's kind of weird to have it in that order. I don't know, whatever. It's very off topic.
Another good reason that to think that a woman is an adult human female is because it's the ordinary way that the term is used. The term woman is used.
So remember, we talked about this at the outset. This is actually a myth. This is not real at all. Remember Daria Morgendorfer. Never forget.
So dictionaries, although they are fallible, they do lend credence to the ordinary way that people use terms.
I just want to have that
that's
picture up
evidence
so we
that
can go
woman
back to it every time this comes up.
refers to adult human females. But moving on, a lot of people that, in defense of the proposition that trans women are women, have presented something known as the social view within the literature, which is that somebody is a woman if and only if she exhibits the social, cultural, or behavioral traits typically associated with females.
So, kind of, but in part also defines what those are associated to be, and
this view
so
is
we'll
pretty
get to the
common,
other.
but The problem with this one, more so, is that if somebody does not exhibit the social, cultural, or behavioral traits typically associated with females, then they would not be women.
So it's really funny she says this, because this is the kind of argument that like only really works if you don't remember, if there's like no understanding of how gay rights movements have been in the past. Like when like I know that when gay rights were more and family, like I wasn't alive for this, so I think this was a little bit before my time, but like when a lot of the stuff was going down, lesbians were actively called like were called men very often for not exhibiting the expected female traits, but they in some way define what those female traits are, just in the same way that that trans women want to be, and I think are, part of the same group that would define what those expectations are. Yeah, and men were called princes or queens. Yeah, also true. Yeah, this is like, it's wild to be like, if that were true, then this is how things would work. That's how people treat it. It's the problem. The problem is that we're not using identification because there are issues with all these other models.
And this would obviously exclude some trans women, but trans women, it would also exclude.
And always remember with this, she'll never, people like this will never address this. Also consider, are there cis women who fail to meet this category? Hunter has already pointed out that the biological model does not include all cis women. So her own, like, the thing she'll keep coming back to does not work, right? It already excludes people she would consider women, if you actually held to it in that way. As it turns out, we don't actually hold to these terms in this way. But, you know, it's another way of phrasing this. I think we talked about this before. You could ask instead, or you can say as a proponent here, instead of saying trans women are women, you should say trans women are as much women as cis women. And that would be exactly true, no matter which model you use.
Punitively people that we would agree that are women, such as cisgendered women. So I think the social view fails on that account. The next view is the self-identification.
And notice we're going through this exact same, like, we're going through a similar set of different views with the exact same arguments against them as we had in the Dr. Bogardus one, and the exact same type of impact of, like, therefore it is false that all trans women are women. Like, I mean, I haven't seen this debate. She did this in the other one. Almost certainly will have that exact say that exact thing,
which has been more pervasive within mainstream media. Somebody is a woman if and only if she identifies as a woman. Obviously, the problem with this definition is it's viciously circular.
So circular definitions are not a problem. We covered this in the other debate, but we also covered this like 10 minutes ago. Boom. The word grace is in the definition for the word graceful. How does that help? That's because that's not how definitions work. People don't read a dictionary to understand how what a word's definition is for most words. Once you have a baseline understanding of the language, that's when you'll approach a dictionary to understand how certain words work, or like the nuances or whatever. And this is usually like so that you're on the same page as everyone, so you understand how people are using the word. But that's not how anyone understands what the word woman means. When you grow up, you just are around people and you hear the word woman used a lot. You're never like learning the language. You're never like mama, and then your mother pulls out a dictionary and is like, mama means this, and I'm a woman, and woman is a adult human female. Do you understand? You're like, adult human female. That's not how it works. That's not how anyone learns language. You understand the vibe, and then you understand and you associate the word with the concept that exists in your brain, and you apply it outwardly to the world. The definition of woman in the dictionary is an approximation, an attempt to understand what that concept is that we all associate with this word. But nobody looks in a dictionary and says, hey, what's a woman? And like, oh, well, it's circular, so I can't know what it is. That's not relevant to this discussion, because nobody approaches that way. People who learn English as not their first language also don't look in the dictionary for the word woman. They instead will look in a translation dictionary and say, oh, this is the same as the word whatever it is in their language, and they cross apply the concepts Nobody looks at the definition for woman to understand what the word woman means. That's not what that definition is there for. I don't think she's wrong to say it as a circular, though. Women are people who do things that women do. She is wrong because for the circularity thing, because it's also not a woman is someone who is a woman. That's not the same thing as someone who identifies with this category, which is what the self-identification view is saying. It is not merely a woman is a woman. That would be completely circular and tautological and completely useless as a definition, even with the understanding that that's not how people use the word. Instead, it is someone who engages in the action of identifying with this category that has a lot of social expectations that could not possibly be written in a definition.
It's uninformative. It doesn't tell us what a woman actually is. And there's no trait that you obtain in reality just by identifying it. There's always...
So that's also not true. And Hunter already provided what I think is a great example of a thing that you... of a trait you can have merely by identifying with it, being a fan. If you say you are a Patriots fan, then you're a Patriots fan. And, like, I don't know what you could possibly do to ever disprove that someone is a fan of whatever thing or whatever show or team or band or whatever else they are. Like, you're gonna interrogate, like, oh, have you ever been to any of their games? Well, it doesn't matter. Have you ever seen any of their games? It doesn't really matter. Like, they by identifying as a fan, they have added that trait to them. Like, they have put themselves in that category, you know?
Necessary and sufficient conditions to go through.
And there are expectations someone might have for a fan. So you might say, oh, but weren't you rooting against the Patriots in the last game? Just like someone might and it's, by the way, considered pretty rude to start interrogating that, in the same way that it's pretty rude to start interrogating, like, well, you say you're a woman, but, like, are you barefoot and pregnant at home with 6 kids? Well, maybe that's not a requisite for being that thing. Maybe there is more to that concept than the expectations, and that's, I think, very exactly analogous.
True. Another common self-identification view people have been positing in order to avoid the problem of vicious circularity is somebody is a woman if and only if she identifies as female. Such as Cambridge Dictionary recently updated.
So I guess Cambridge Dictionary says that, but that does not sound in line with anything I've ever heard from any trans activist, because there is an understanding that female is a sexual term, or is a sex classification, not a gendered one. And while I have definitely heard some trans women take the position that they are at this point female to some extent, and I kind of understand where they're coming from. I would want to understand it better before I started arguing that it's true. They also do not say that identifying as female is the requisite. They say identifying as a woman is the requisite.
Woman as to be allowed
identifying with as the gender, not the sex.
So the problem with this definition is identifying as a female is not a valid identity, in that it would be identifying as a biological falsehood. The implications of this view...
By the way, you can identify as things that make no sense. That doesn't make it not the case. For example, we can go to religion again. No matter what religion you believe in or don't believe in, there are religions you think are false. And so it would be like saying, like, if someone's a Christian, it would be saying that it is nonsense for someone to say they're a Muslim because you're identifying with something that is false, because, like, that isn't the true religion, or vice versa. But that is obviously nonsense, because clearly the category exists, and clearly there are people who believe it, and it does not matter whether you think what they believe in is true or not. That's not delegitimizing at all. I haven't heard her make this argument. Maybe she dropped it because of how ridiculous it is, but because I'm pretty sure the debate she had with Vosh came after this one. I think I saw it more recently in modern day debates thing. So, like, and she didn't have that there. So I think she might have dropped this for how stupid it is.
It would mean that you can identify as having Down syndrome, for example, which is chromosomal.
Well, right, but that wouldn't make you someone with Down syndrome. That would make you whatever we call the category of people who identifies as having that. right? Like you might believe you might believe you're Napoleon, but you in fact, and then the category that puts you in is what I don't know what the name for the mental disorder where you believe you're a fictitious person in the past, but like it's that, right? Like that's the thing that you notice that the self ID she presented isn't saying someone is a female if they identify as female. It says they're a woman if they identify as female. Wow,
Having
this is
certain
like
neurodegenerative
internally
disorders. Obviously,
inconsistent.
you cannot identify as things that aren't in
Yeah,
accordance with reality.
I
especially
understand why she took
biological
this out.
reality in this case. Okay. This view is the gendered brain view. This one has been becoming more popular among popular creators. In this view, a woman is a woman if and only if she has the brain of a female.
I don't think
Therefore,
we need to
trans
give this
women
much
are women
credence.
because
As
in
I
their
understand it,
brains-
this is not a particularly popular belief, and it doesn't seem to align terribly well with how brains work. There's not like really such a thing as a pink brain or a blue brain. So we'll let her talk, just so I don't skip by too much, but I'm not gonna address this too much. As I understand it, it's not something anyone actually believes in.
Obviously, right off the bat, not all trans women have the brain of a female. Not even all cis women have the brain of a female. And to conclude, brain sex does not determine gender, as we know that many homosexual men tend to have brains closer to females than
Yeah,
males.
sure.
So clearly,
Also,
conclusively, the gendered brain view
Also,
is
as far as
false.
I know, people do not take that
And
view.
finally, Hunter's account of gender, which I know he's
Whoa, what? What the hell? This is. Oh, he must have said this before. I was like, how the hell is this in her PowerPoint? Or was she making this slide as he was typing? What the hell? No, okay. He said this before.
Sean in the opening statement that he has on his YouTube a little bit, but a woman is somebody whose internal perception aligns with what we culturally view as feminine.
And he did say
Clothing,
that
dress,
in his opening.
behaviors, voice, all things that we would generally consider feminine and more typically associated with females. There's a couple problems with this view. I think that even under this account of gender, it's still not trans inclusive. Not all trans
we'll let her
women
say
are
the
women
things.
under this account. Like, for example, as I mentioned earlier, a butch trans woman.
Yeah, this is exactly the same thing I was saying was a problem. Is that being a woman is not synonymous with femininity. There are aspects of womanhood that are not feminine. They're like butch women are women, but they're not particularly feminine. That's like the whole thing. But they're defining in a sense what it means to be a woman by being butch and women. This is the problem with using feminine as the term here, but that's supposed to be a stand-in for like the general vibe that we mean, because he knows people like this. If he said like we view as being womanly, she'd be like, you used the word in the definition, like, it's an attempt to circumnavigate that.
Or the movement in the trans community as to trans women do not.
Oh, she's gonna skip through a lot of what she says on here, but apparently because she skipped to like the third one. But wow, first of all, even jumping there, that is really uncharitable. What the hell, Sanvi? Butch trans women will not be women according to Hunter. No, I don't think Hunter has said that. Maybe don't put words in his mouth. Maybe you should say under this view. But also the culturally relative thing. I don't know, Sanvi. I don't know if you know. Gender is culturally relative. I don't know if you're aware. We like. I don't know if you think women have been as you think women are in every culture throughout history across the world, but no. Yes, gender is a culturally relative thing. I don't know what to tell you. And yeah, okay. And yes, if a woman did what was culturally expected of her from one culture in a culture where they do different things, then they would be considered not womanly. Yeah, I don't know what to tell you. Trans femme, non-binary people are women according to no, because they don't associate with with that category. I mean, maybe maybe that would be an issue. Cognitive disabled women cannot be. Okay, so like this is a thing she said. If this comes up again, I'll address it, but it's fucking stupid, and I don't want to do it. It'd take too long to unravel how stupid that argument is. That cognitively disabled women cannot be women according to this view. Like, I'm just not going to deal with it. It's incredibly stupid. Just leave it there. Gender nonconforming radical feminists are not women according to. Okay, again, she's saying like putting all this like. How does she not know she's being dishonest? Like, she's putting all these words in his mouth. Maybe he wouldn't agree with that and would want to update his definition. Yeah, that's the biggest issue with gender ideology. Their definitions end up being circular. It is what it is. Well, circularity isn't a problem, right? If you'd been paying attention, which, I mean, clearly you hadn't. Circularity isn't inherently a problem because, as it turns out, nobody looks in the dictionary to find out what a woman is. Additionally, uh, additionally, there are problems with every model, in particular the like quote unquote biological one. It's just that transphobes refuse to acknowledge those, whereas trans activists try to make arguments to demonstrate the truth of our position. So like, I don't know how to tell what to tell you about that.
OU femininity, or radical feminists who are gender nonconforming, who do not adhere to what they do not internally perceive themselves as what we culturally view as feminine, but rather perceive things that are viewed as masculine. But we would still punitively agree that they are women. So I think this account fails as well. And to kind of conclude here, so we can sort of get into the debate, I think that any account that you give of what a woman is still not going to be trans inclusive fully unless you take the self-ID view, which has its own set of cases. But I'll conclude here and let us get started.
So I'd like to note that the totality of her argument is that there is no working definition of woman. Not merely that Hunter's definition doesn't work, but that no definition works. She didn't provide one that is functional. She just tried to like assume that there is one, but there are obvious problems with what she is considered the ordinary and normal view, which is a myth. But never appraises it for whether it functions in itself, which it doesn't, right? It excludes people that she would consider women, people who are cis women, not trans whatsoever, but do not fall under the category of adult human female, even though she would consider them women. And Hunter laid out a lot of these, so I hope he brings it back. Obviously, her opening isn't going to factor in what Hunter has already said, so he needs to address that, and I think that would be like a good first angle of approach. Circularity is a problem if you want to assert that the definition it has any meaning. Not. It depends on what kind of circularity you have. Again, nobody argues that the word graceful has no meaning, even though having or showing grace. I know there's this or elegance, but this is optional, right? One of these two things must be the case. The word grace is in the definition, right? Like this happens constantly because a lot of this is based on a vibe. It's based on a sense that you get outside of reading it in a dictionary, because that's not how you get there. The definition is trying to encapsulate this, but ultimately there's an insurmountable difficulty of encapsulating the totality of what we mean by these words that are very much kind of a vibe, and often the word exists to describe a thing that we don't have other words to describe, which means you're going to have a hard time describing what that word means without using it. If the word grace is the thing that graceful people have, then it would be meaningless. But because grace has another meaning, it works. Well, you say that, but someone does not have to have elegance to be graceful, so they could have or show grace. And what the fuck does that mean? Right? And there are similar words that can help get you the vibe, and you probably know the difference between graceful and dignified, even though they're supposed to be similar, or graceful and elegant. Those aren't exactly the same, right? Graceful is not a good word to use in your argument because it's grace plus full. I mean, you can say so, but it's just because I can't think of a better example where these things happen. But a well-worn example as to definitions just being unable to work is the definition of chair, because it's a separate seat for one person, typically with a back and four legs. So typically means not always, and a seat for, and then people have demonstrated, like here, is this a chair? Here's one. It's a separate seat for one person. It has a back and four legs. This is a chair. Clearly, definitions fail a lot because what they're trying to encapsulate is an idea that we understand without this definition. Nobody reads this definition to understand what a chair is. And I don't know if you could convince me that anyone does. Instead, what happens is you get a sense of the word, and a definition is an attempt to write down what it means. And that attempt will often fail in a number of ways, and we need to update any issues that we have with that. One of the ways it could fail, for example, is when you say adult human female, and then include people who are like who have like Swyer syndrome. Are they female? I'm not really sure. Or what do we mean by female? Because that's not binary, it's bimodal. There are lots of these problems. Same could be said for sandwich. A taco is a taco a sandwich? Exactly. Yeah. See, that's the thing. Like a lot of these definitions are really nebulous. This is why there was that like joke argument that happened for years. Is a hot dog a sandwich? And people usually go based on vibe. In fact, the best answers I've ever generally found are ones that are just really funny and just go with the vibe, right? Like my favorite answer of all time is that no, because a sandwich has bread on top and bottom. So I asked, well, then does that mean if I turn a hot dog sideways, it becomes a sandwich? And the answer was yes, but you're a monster. And that's great. That's a perfect answer. And I have absolutely no notes. But this is the kind of thing, like definitions are an attempt to describe how we use words, but they fail because they can't encapsulate the concept that is actually in our head. Yet most people understand what well, you say understand that, but I'm arguing you are incorrect in that assertion. And in fact, you are not making an observation. You are making a prescriptive statement, green flag. You are saying they should not be considered women. And I think in that, you are clearly wrong. And that's why I'm making a fuss. Because ultimately, while this question is proposed as a philosophical, is this the case or not, it is in fact the basis for, the answer to this question is the basis for political ramifications, such as the trans people not being able to use restrooms in public, or trans people not having access to the medical care they need, or trans people maybe being exterminated if it gets to that point. Now you say based, but that's because you're a bigot, and I need you to understand that about yourself.
Thank you, James.
You got it. Thank you very much for that opening as well. And folks, want to let you know, if you didn't know, Modern Day Debate is 24 now. Fine. With that, and in case you have questions, super chat.
Sure. So, Sanvi, thank you so much for your opening.
Okay,
I really
sexist? In what way am I? Okay. Okay, you can't be real. All right, whatever. Have fun, buddy.
By talking about like how we have adult females in nature as well, which seems to be, I don't want to say an appeal to nature, because I don't know if you're saying just because it's in nature.
I don't like
means
this.
This is how we ought do it in our society. But this also seems to be, again, like a mix-up between sex and gender. Like, you talked a little bit about some people saying they identify as female. I don't know who says that. I know that sometimes people will use those words interchangeably or differently. For me, at least, I try to be really careful about saying female when I am talking about the biological shit.
Yeah, as it turns out, trans people and trans rights proponents tend to be pretty specific and clear with their language, whereas transphobes tend to be the ones who will conflate the terms.
I'm talking about the social gender element. So, saying someone identifies as a female, like, I actually would agree with your part of your slideshow there, because that is kind of silly. That doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah, that one was from Cambridge. I think a lot of people have been updating the word woman as to mean somebody with a female gender identity, but I'm glad we can agree there. Yeah.
Yeah, the main ones that you touched on, though, I think that were interesting were the critiques of my definition, specifically the one that's it's culturally relevant. And I think that this is an interesting one, but I don't think this is actually a defeater at all. I will concede this. It is culturally relevant, 100%. Just like I could, well, hold on.
Yeah, and culturally relative doesn't make it incorrect. There are lots of culturally relative terms. In particular, like what's considered masculine is culturally relative. But even aside from like the gendered stuff, like what a I'm trying to like there are some roles in society that are kind of that differ from culture to culture. I'm just trying to think of what some of them might be. Like, I don't know. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but if I think of one, I'll let y'all know.
But if I go to Brazil, I can still be a football fan based on my identity that has been formed based on this social construct here in the U.S. But what it means to be a football fan here, as opposed to in Brazil, is different. It's
okay, as an example,
but
I guess.
It doesn't negate my identity as a football fan. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So with that definition, would you mind clarifying your definition of woman and how that would relate to that? Because it seems to be a football fan is somebody who identifies as a football fan, but you do not hold that a woman is just somebody who identifies as one, right?
I think he does,
Yeah, well,
but is trying to get around the issues people like you have with circularity by describing it otherwise. Basically, he's trying to describe the category in without using the word, but it ultimately is that a woman is someone who identifies with the category we call woman and the associated expectations, even if they intend not to meet those expectations. Kind of in the same way that, oh, actually, Little Dicky is a good example. Weirdly enough, he is a rapper and wants to be understood in that context, but does things differently than what a lot of other rappers do. But that wouldn't make, even though he wants to be considered in the category with certain expectations, he wants to violate those expectations. He wants to change what it means to be that thing in some way. In the same way that we all change in some way what it means to be our whatever identities that you have, be male, be female, be, or I shouldn't say male, female. It should be a man, be a woman, be, I don't know, funny or whatever else, or be like your job, or like there are a million things, be a Christian. We change what it means to be that by being it, but we still want to be included in that category.
Someone who identifies has an internal perception that aligns with what we culturally view as being feminine. Yes. So if there's an external view of gender, which obviously we have, like we culturally, collectively agree on, like this type of characteristic will be classified as masculine or feminine.
Oh, actually, a great example I was just realized was there's a piece of classical music. I forget the exact name, but it is just silence for some number of minutes. By being being considered in the concept or in the category of music, it changes a little bit. Like you would expect a lot of stuff from music that silence would not encapsulate, but by associating itself with that category, or by being associated with that category, it changes a little bit of like what we could mean about that, and it would not do that without being in part of that category. There's lots of silence all the time that has no such impact as when you do it and call it music. I believe Elon Musk created the first trans people. I mean, people believe all sorts of wacky things. You believe what you want, I guess.
Right. So we already have that. People are going to have an internal perception of themselves that is based upon a collection of external, socially constructed gender characteristics.
I don't like semantics. I'd rather move past definitions and get to the meter gender ideology. I would too. What's unfortunate is that anti-trans argumentation generally tries to back up to the definition thing because they have nothing else. Ultimately, we have to start here because people like this exist. But it is significantly less relevant than the political ramifications. Artists like to do stuff like that, painting that's just a white canvas and call it art. Yeah, and part of what they're and that would not be as relevant. It would not be relevant in the same way if it was just a canvas you were picking up at an art supply store. That we call it art is changing how we view it, even if you have a very negative view on it. Even if you think like, oh, that's bad art or whatever, like it doesn't matter. The point is you view it differently because of the category in which it is placed. And that is part of what's going on with trans people, even in as much as they might not be interested in conforming to the expectations of their gender.
Right. And so with that, that's going to form an internal identity.
So would you say if somebody has an internal perception of themselves that more so aligns with what we traditionally view as masculine, that they would then be a man, not a woman?
That's how I would define being a man, yes. And usually
interesting. So he does go that far.
I
Okay,
think
I
that
disagree
a
with
lot of
Hunter
this
here.
is, like much more subconscious too.
Well, apparently he goes as far as to be like, yeah, like if you are sufficiently masculine, you're a man, irrespective of your identity. Like I'm surprised he agrees that he said as much. Maybe after some discussion, he might not hold to that. But oh my, no, I disagree with that strongly. No. You can if someone is masculine, is extremely masculine, but identifies as a woman, for example, very butch women, that doesn't make them a man.
I think that's why I try to touch on it on my opening about how a good amount of people I don't think really think about gender. I don't think I was one of those people. It never really occurred to me.
Yeah, most people don't.
But yeah, I would define it as such.
Yeah, and I think maybe people don't think about gender, but I do think they think about masculinity and femininity implicitly, like, oh, I dress different and act different than other women around me. So I think this begs the question of, are masculine women women?
Yes,
That
because
are,
it's about an internal perception, not an external behavior. I'm glad that you touched on that as well, which is another
Oh,
misunderstanding. This, like, oh, it's just a stereotype of what it means to be.
that's
Not really.
odd.
No,
That
it's
seems at
not
odd with
wearing
what
a
odds with
dress and
what he said
lipstick that
before.
makes you a woman. It's like what I said. It's you have an internal identity, but if you identify a certain way, odds are you're going to take steps to, yeah, probably present in ways that we culturally view as being like a gendered expectation or
So is his
role.
idea then that very masculine presenting women internally are very feminine? That seems really weird. I'm not going to interrogate it too much. This is kind of a weird view that I don't really agree with. Um,
Or
yeah, that's
behavior.
strange. I thought he
So
was
same
saying
with
something very different.
being a woman, right?
I think that's what I was touching on, is that you said an internal perception of yourself that you personally align with these feminine or these masculine traits. So hence why if a masculine woman has this perception of herself, like, I traditionally like more manly things than I do things typically associated with females, then by your logic, I feel like she would have to be a man.
Well, if you're talking about someone like a butch lesbian, for example,
Yes, yes.
as
Like, you
it's
can
a
give that.
weird juxtaposition here because butch lesbian, because of the fact that it's also the lesbian factor, it still is actually on that spectrum of femininity because
Oh, this is
lesbian
really
being
weird.
someone
Okay.
who identifies themselves right as a woman who is attracted to other women, usually attracted to other females, I would actually say.
Okay.
But by your logic, she
Sure,
would just be
Hunter.
a
We're
straight
probably gonna go
man.
off the rails on
Because
this
then
No,
weird
she
definition
wouldn't
for a
because
while
she's
then.
no, because by being a butch
That's very
lesbian,
strange.
she has an internal perception of herself that still aligns with elements that are culturally feminine because a butch lesbian is still
Maybe if I'm being like maximally charitable, we could say what he's trying to express is that in his view, considering yourself a woman is one of those very feminine things that we would expect. One of those feminine things that we would expect someone to associate with it, like in that it's sorry, I'm like rephrasing it on the fly. Um, maybe that's what he's saying, like that identifying as a woman is that feminine aspect, and that is sufficient. Which means like if we eventually get back to the self ID view, it's a little weird. I'm not sure that that's what he's saying though.
encompassing of femininity to a degree. You're talking about a lesbian who
Okay.
presents in ways that are butch, however, they still perceive themselves and identify themselves as women.
But just because you identify and perceive yourself as a woman isn't what makes you a woman. It's if you internally perceive that you like these feminine characteristics.
Not
That's
like
the
those
thing.
things, that you have an internal perception of yourselves that aligns more. It's not just like I like these things. It's not, oh, in my heart I like wearing jean jackets, so I guess I'm a man now. No, it's a much more subtle and I would say like internalized sense of self that plays a role here in masculinity and femininity and whatnot. But no, being a butch lesbian,
So then,
expressing yourself in ways that are butch, does not negate the fact that you can still have an internal perception of yourself that can align with elements of femininity.
so is he saying then the like hypothetical butch lesbian in this concept would have an internal sense of self that is feminine? I'm not sure that corresponds very well with how butch women tend to view themselves. Maybe it does, but that seems a little weird. Can't answer that question. All I can say is why not? Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah.
Take a butch trans woman, for example, the movement within the trans community that trans women, in fact, do not owe you femininity. We can have desires, preferences, thoughts,
Just like cis women don't owe you femininity, right? Like as a note about that.
feelings, all in accordance to what is traditionally viewed as masculine, yet still be women. Like, would you agree then that butch trans women aren't women?
Could you say that one more time? I'm sorry.
Yeah, like we know what a butch lesbian is. So there's a
course.
movement within the trans community that trans women, in fact, do not owe you femininity. So a butch trans woman is somebody who feels that their internal perception is more masculine, yet their identity as a woman is valid. So would you say like a butch trans woman is not a woman?
Well, hold on. You just made an assumption there that their internal perception is more masculine. It seems like what Hunter is saying is that like if you're identifying as a woman, your internal perception is more feminine.
how is their identity? They said they don't owe you femininity. Isn't that most likely talking about a expressing conventional views of femininity? This doesn't really play much in with the internal perception, because if they're identifying themselves as a woman, that is encompassing of having an internal perception that aligns with
Okay,
certain
okay,
cultural
that
views
does
of
sound okay.
femininity.
It seems like I was correct. It seems like what he's saying is that identifying as a woman demonstrates an internal perception of oneself that Hunter would consider that Hunter would consider sufficiently feminine to be to denote that like you identify as aligning with the feminine aspect with feminine expectations or the category associated with femininity, which feels like just like identifying as a woman but with extra steps. I wonder why he does this. I wonder if that's to get around the circularity issue, which isn't actually a problem, but a lot of people think it is, so maybe that's why. But it sounds like we're getting back to like it's just identifying as a woman but with extra steps.
Because again,
I think
this is
This
what's
is
well,
perhaps a
hold on,
lot
this is
creates
what's
more
interesting
service
about
roads
this.
for trans
Hold on,
people.
please.
John Benet Ramsey, in chat, like I never know what you're going on about. This is very weird. Oh, lol, so stuff I do with extra sex. Yeah, it seems like I'm a man and a woman. Well, you might be joking, Peachy Keen, but that is an experience some people have had. This is where some non-binary people. I've heard some non-binary experience can be like feeling both, feeling like you're both a man and a woman, and then also some non-binary experience feeling kind of like neither. There's a lot of experience that people can have with their understanding of gender, and it's not necessary. These two things aren't mutually exclusive.
Because this is what's interesting about this external social construct about gender, is that there is contrasting elements of both masculinity and femininity, more so femininity, like the fact that being like the quote unquote bitchy girl boss, right, is a feminine thing, but also being the super nurturing like trad wife is a feminine thing. But these are arguably opposites. So having certain collections
it's very,
or
very
parts
true.
that you identify more so.
There's a lot of like
and then
contradictions in
presenting
what we expect
differently.
from these roles
These
too.
are two separate things, having an internal identity versus presentation.
And by the way, in a sense, the butch women that they were talking about are defining femininity by being butch, simultaneous to being women. Like they're defining a little bit of what femininity even means. This is
Yes,
just
so
part of
with that being
how
said,
these
so
categories
if they
work.
have an internal perception of any part of femininity, they could claim to be a woman, or are you saying there's a
Based on
certain
Hunter's
threshold
definition, I
there?
can't even
or-
claim I'm a man or woman. I have no
Yeah, it would
experience of both at
usually
the same
be
time.
like,
Clear.
I don't
Like
know the
said, I'm
exact
Peachy Keen.
threshold. I'm not going to sit down.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can't really speak to your experience, Peachy Keen. His definition I do find a little convoluted and strange. It feels like the shortest understanding of it is like it's just identifying with a particular gender with extra steps, and understanding that people identify with one gender or other for reasons. Where it's not that like it's on a whim like a lot of transphobe pretend. There's a they want to be treated as part of that category, and if for a reason like it jives better with their experience, or they want to be that treatment jives better with how they feel how they feel and whatnot. So like there are reasons for why people will do this. It's not just like, oh, like there's nothing to it. That said, I'm a gender abolitionist. There's kind of nothing to it. Be you. Like just because you were born with particular genitalia doesn't mean that like you have to act a certain way. And like why should it be weird if we encounter someone who like is a lumberjacks and likes Harleys and unicorns? Like yeah, they don't need one. No. But ultimately there are reasons, and these reasons are often these reasons have a lot to do with self-perception and external perception. Uh, I mean, this is what people talk about with gender dysphoria, right? There is a discomfort in being understood differently to how you feel to be. I mean, you can imagine for yourself, like if someone treated you as the other gender just all the time. Like if people always treated you as though you were the other gender, like that would be kind of discomforting for you, right? And so maybe you would say like, oh, I want to be treated the other way. Like this is the kind of reason I'm talking about, you know? What does that even I assume you mean? Well, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, people talk about like there's a lot of experience that people have based on how they perceive their gender. In fact, trans people, I'll direct you towards looking for trans people talking about their experience with gender, because one of the things that has been noted is they do get treated differently based on their gender. I know at a minimum, like ContraPoints has mentioned that like once she started transitioning, people started talking about her appearance a lot more. Like that is a difference in treatment based on perceived gender that does happen, and there's a difference also in like how friends relate to each other and all this other stuff. There are these big differences. Maybe there shouldn't be. Why are people treating people based on what gender they think? Well, that's a great question. I think this is like one of the problems of gender as a concept in society. It there shouldn't be those treatments, but it does happen, and there are a lot of expectations and like cultural expectations. I'm sure you've encountered them. You probably just need to do a little bit of thinking of like your own experiences of what of how the world is to you, but like if you were not the gender you are, it would be different, you know, or like maybe your hobbies, there would be more or less expectations toward those, or maybe your career, or maybe a bunch of other things. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that, and yeah, it probably shouldn't be the case, but in as much as it is, we should endeavor to treat people in a way that, you know, that they want to be treated, you know, barring the unreasonable, like if someone wants to be treated as royalty all the time. Maybe that's, you know, we're not talking about the ridiculous. We're just saying like there are different modes of relation that people have to the world, and trans people are often, one of the things that the trans people are saying by transitioning is that they want to be, they want their experience to be in a different, you know, in line with a different mode of experience.
And be like,
Yeah,
it is exactly,
obviously
you
it's,
must
it's
like
not
the color pink
mathematical,
and
right?
also
But
want
let's
to wear
say
dress, but like
more
it's
so
still...
if somebody has more so characteristics aligned with masculinity than femininity, and that's their internal perception, would they fall under man or woman?
If
Yeah,
they
we're
had
gonna
more
go on about this for a
characteristics that
while. It
were
seems like.
masculine, as in external
I'm gonna try not to pause so
perception
much unless we have
their
like something
internal
off topic to go on
perception,
about, because
of like
this is just
masculinity and femininity was that they have more masculine
this is
traits than
mostly to do
feminine
with
traits.
his
they would
kind
view
of weird
themselves as more aligned with
and
cultural views
quirky
of
and unusual
masculinity,
definition.
then yes, that would be my definition of a man.
Right, yeah. So under this definition is why I think that not all trans women are women still, because a butch
Also.
woman would be a man to you.
No, did you not remember that I just explained that?
So, well, I just asked if they have more characteristics in their internal perception of self that
Internal
are aligned with
perception.
what we culturally view as masculinity rather than femininity.
Yes, but if you're a butch lesbian, there is still a overlap there with femininity
I said
as well.
butch trans woman. I see the confusion. Not butch lesbian. Butch trans.
So wait, hold on. A
Yeah.
butch trans woman
Yeah.
is somebody who, if they are saying that they are a woman, then that is someone who still has an internal perception of themselves.
Yeah,
that
okay.
aligns with
It seems
some
like
aspect
okay.
of femininity.
Yeah, I'm pretty
but
sure
they
this is
present in
self-ID
ways
with
that are
extra
more
steps.
butch. This is like the tom girl argument. This is like when people say, are tomboys now actually boys? No, like they're a tomboy because they're recognized as a girl who
Femboys
likes
are another
to
good example. Like
present or
the
engage in
category of
behaviors that are
boy
maybe
applying
more
to
so
them
associated with masculinity.
is different than if
Yeah,
they
I think
behaved
this
in the
just,
same femme
is
way
your-
while
I
being a
think you're
girl, you know.
conflating presentation here with like internal identity.
No, like plenty of butch trans women have an internal identity of being very masculine. They perceive themselves to align with more society's views as masculine rather than feminine, yet they still identify as women. So I think the proposition would still be false because you said more masculine identification than feminine identification would allude
Well,
to.
you would have to go about determining how that goes about because again,
You can set
if
that
you're
threshold.
well, hold on, because if you're going to say something along the lines of they more so align with masculinity, but they're still professing to be a woman, I guess if you want to like make up a scenario in that case, fine. But no, in most cases, I would say someone
Okay,
who's
so
a
there
man
is some
someone
amount
whose
to which
internal
Hunter is
perception-
saying like the amount to which you are masculine or feminine affects your gender irrespective of your identity. I don't agree with that. Because then you do get to the point of like, okay, if a woman, even a cis woman, is like sufficiently butch, you start calling her a man, and that's appropriate. I don't think that's right.
Cultural views of masculinity. And if someone is a butch trans woman, so yes, they identify as a woman, meaning they still have an internal perception of themselves that aligns with certain cultural views of femininity. Do you
I
not
think-
understand
I
that?
think the
That they can have that but
confusion is,
present differently?
it depends on the case, but if we were to your definition of woman is an internal perception that aligns with what we culturally view as feminine, and then vice versa, masculine for man. So would you say that if somebody has an internal perception of themselves that they more so align with masculine characteristics, and obviously we can't quantify this, we'll just say more, right?
But
then
my
they
no
would
no no because okay,
essentially be a man.
sorry to cut you off, but the thing is
I'm
if they
curious
had
now.
that, then the assumption would be they would then be identifying as a man. So
But
if
that's
someone
not the
says I
case.
have an internal perception that aligns with masculinity, but
Yeah.
I'm a woman.
Expression or I mean, I'm curious now because we were talking about art before. I wonder what is the dictionary definition of art? I'm curious. One of the biggest challenges for trans people were those A cards. What's an A card? I'm not sure what you're talking about. The expression or application of human creative skill and imagination. So that would exclude the blank canvas or the urinal that was in like the 70s or whatever. So like already excluding things that we consider art. Typically in a visual form such as painting or sculpture. Obviously not always, right? Like music is art, but it's saying typically, so not always, right? Uh, Anytime I see typically in a definition, it feels kind of like almost irrelevant because it by no means excludes things that aren't like this. I guess it's just saying like these things definitely are, though there are other things that might also. Producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power, or I think for their artistic importance, right? Like, yeah, so like this excludes things that we would consider art, um, and certain things are only valuable because or only interesting because they are added to this category, even if they don't meet the expectations. Yeah, this is actually a pretty reasonable like counter definition to work to argue from the position of, because then you can say like, okay, like what we consider art clearly has more to do with what is considered in that category than it does what the definition says is in that category. Also, like creative skill could include like writing the code for a website, right? That's creative skill, but we don't generally consider it art. It could be considered art. I don't think it would be wrong to consider like certain approaches like interesting and like and like creative enough to be considered art. I don't think it would be incorrect, but like clearly like some of these things don't really encapsulate what we mean about this stuff. And imagination, like this is I guess when people see those canvases that are painted all one color, like, oh, is that imagination? Like in a way yes, but in a way no. And like this is very like open to interpretation. That's kind of the point. A lot of these terms, you learn what art is by being pointed at art repeatedly and then having a sense of it. You don't go to this definition to find out what it means.
Woman, that would not make that would be a contradiction.
Okay, so just to clarify though, that a butch trans woman then would not be a woman to you.
No, because by calling
Okay.
themselves a woman, they still obviously
He's not
have
saying no
some form
as
of an
in
internal
like no they wouldn't be.
perception
He's
aligns
saying
with
that is
elements
incorrect.
of femininity.
Even
Ask
if
them,
they're
what is it?
asserting that their internal perception is more masculine.
Are they asserting that their internal perception is more masculine, or that they
Yes.
prefer to present more masculine?
No, that their internal, they typically like things, and
Yeah, and I do
typically
think
their
this is a
desires,
flaw
preferences,
with
thoughts,
Hunter's
everything is
definition.
more so in
Someone
accordance to
could
what
have
society traditionally views
internally
as
a view of themselves that is very masculine, but they could be like, yes, I am a very
that's
masculine
interesting. Yeah,
woman.
I would really like an example of that because
Yeah, I mean,
I would
I
be
said
very
it a
curious.
little
I'm
bit,
sure
but
you
I
could
don't
find
know if
people
Yeah,
who
but if you're talking about
who
somebody
consider themselves
says
women
that
and
they
very
more
masculine,
so fit in these views of cultural views,
and not just present
then
masculine, but consider
that almost sounds
themselves
like it's a
very
or a
masculine.
non-binary individual, somebody who doesn't fit into either category neatly. That's almost what that sounds like. But I would love to see an example of somebody who says, I internally align with masculinity. I want to present masculine. Why? Wait, if they're presenting masculine, why do they want to be referred to as women?
Yeah, so I think I cited a published
And something
paper
you
on
could
this
do in
in my
arguments with someone like
presentation,
this
but the
is you could
idea
start to
is
be
more
like, "Hey,
so.
Sanvi, how do I know you're a woman?" Literally, like, you tell me you're a woman, but if I'm not, if your identification shouldn't matter, it isn't like the thing I determine things off of. How the hell do I know? Your sexual characteristics are not discernible here. I only have gendered characteristics. So clearly it's not a biological thing, and anything other than the self ID view would have a lot of problems. Maybe you wouldn't find yourself in that category.
That cisgendered women, they can internally feel masculine, still call
Then it could be
themselves
art
women
because using
validly, and
genders.
everybody
So
putatively agrees that they're masculine, even though they have
a
an internal
solution.
sense of being
Yeah, I agree with Peachy
women,
Keen.
even
I
though
think
they
it
have an
very
internal
much
sense of being
coding
masculine.
can
So
be
the
considered
idea
art.
is
I
that
I
trans
wouldn't
women
argue with someone who
also don't owe you that.
wanted to call particularly creative approaches artistic. Definitely wouldn't argue about it. But it's not generally considered art, even though it meets the definition. That's kind of the difficulty with art, is that so many things are open to being art, even things that were not previously considered art. That's why people have to go to extremes, like putting a urinal in a museum to find a thing that like would be so unlikely to be considered art. Uh, but yeah, like I think it wouldn't be like, certainly agree with what you're saying there.
They might not owe you a presentation, but if you're going to have an internal identity, this is why my definition
Keep getting distracted. I just want to get through this portion. Unfortunately, with stuff like this, there aren't like, all right, we're done with this derailment at this timestamp.
Again, what's the example?
We've already been at this. Maybe we should come back to this, because we've already had a lot to talk about, and we've been at it for almost 2 hours. I know I've blathered for like 20 minutes at the outset.
Because that almost sounds like a straw man. That sounds like something you're making up.
I think we will come back to it. I think that's what we'll do. We'll go to like maybe a little past the hour.
Why then would they want to be referred to as a woman?
At a minimum, we'll get through this portion, and then we'll come back to it tomorrow, because this is like, this kind of argument I think is very rich in exactly the kind of argumentation that I think I'm good at dealing with. And so I do want to go through it, and since it's with a new person, we'll at the very least have something more interesting. I find it hard to agree with either side here. It's an interesting topic. I tend to agree with you, but mostly because Hunter's definition is so weird. Though, I hope at the very least I've made the case for my position on the subject as distinct from Hunter's, and like as that arguing against Sanvi. I hope I gave you something to chew on, at the very least, like made a good case for why she's very wrong. That's what I hope to do here. That's why we're reviewing stuff, right? We're shadowboxing.
Could go back, but she's always a woman, butch lesbian trans woman in the lesbian community, and so I don't think it's just something that's being made up. It's something that's often discussed in the literature, especially those who support a more self-identification view of what gender is. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah. No,
yeah, I don't think it's particularly weird to find women who consider themselves very masculine, not just outwardly, but inwardly as well. So, yeah, why does lesbian keep coming up? How is that remotely bad? Because there's a stereotype of like butch women being lesbians. It's because we're operating on stereotypes here, and it's like easy to get like the image in your head. Like a lot of people have the image in their head of like butch lesbian. In fact, it's like, oh man, I'm gonna struggle to find it. If you've seen the remake of the producer's movie, there's even that scene where like you see the director and like everyone's stereotypically flamboyantly gay, and it's like, oh, here's my costume designer. It's the one woman in the room, and she's like incredibly masculine, like butch presenting, and with the joke being like, oh, because everyone here is gay, she must be a lesbian, and lesbians are like this. It's just stereotypes. We're just working with stereotypes just to like get a concept that we can work from, because she's trying to express to him that like, no, there are women who are very masculine, and not just in presentation, but in self concept, and like starting with the stereotype is one way where like, we're on the same page at the very least.
That it's a little
it's not super relevant, to be fair.
Even if you want to say, here's this one example where your definition might not actually be all encompassing, which is fair, by the way. It's incredibly difficult to have a definition that is 100% all encompassing. You recognize that your definition is far more exclusionary, correct?
Yeah, and I'm fine with that. I'm willing to concede that, just as you're willing to concede that. That's fine.
Wait. Okay, hold on. Because I'm willing to concede that if you want to get for that one example you gave, sure, then my definition might not be applicable there. I will
Okay,
literally concede that
yeah,
because hold on,
that's
wait, please.
fine.
Wait, please. Because I'm okay recognizing that there is no such thing as an all-encompassing definition. However, my
Okay, I like
definition
that. That's a good point.
encompasses
Yeah.
more utility
Great,
and
Hunter.
encompasses more people who are women. So your
Great.
definition
Now what he ought to do, and it doesn't sound like he's going to, is you immediately segue that into an argumentative attack on her definition. Because remember, she's not saying it outright, but she is presenting a proposal for a definition. And now you turn around and you go, clearly there are huge problems with the definition you've presented. Let's address those and see what you have to say about it.
do you think that those people, for example, the girls
Yeah,
that I referenced,
because
that
he
are
needs
born
to
in
be
Denmark with
going more on the
male
offensive here.
chromosomes, are they just
Okay,
you know,
cool. No, he
still
did do
view them
that.
as
Okay,
women,
cool.
or like
Yeah,
what?
I don't think that
Never mind, I
that
was wrong.
has
He
any
did do it.
bearing on
Great.
the proposition
Great job.
are trans women women, because even if the biological account of female fails, it still wouldn't prove that trans women are women. It would just prove
But see,
that
this is exactly why I had the issue with the thing, right? She wants to take the position of mere negation, but obviously mere negation doesn't leave us with no definition. She's assuming as default her definition, but saying, "Oh, well, I don't have to prove it because we're trying to present a different, it's your definition that's on trial here." But no, ultimately this discussion isn't between Hunter's position and nothing else. What the hell just happened here? The hell is this? Sorry, I just had like this weird thing pop up. Oh. Okay. It's not between Hunter and nothing. It's between Hunter's position and hers, which remember is not actually, it's a myth that this is the like normal view, though
you're
Hunter hasn't
unconvinced
mentioned
and
as
we
much.
need something else. We need a new definition.
Well, sure,
but I
we're not.
think that
We're not just talking about are trans women here. We're also talking about
That's
the
the
actual
topic.
definition. Well, I understand that's the topic, but we're also talking about the
Just the
current
smug look on her
definition
face, goddamn.
versus a new definition. So you support the current definition.
Okay, all right. He made a good
yeah,
argument,
it has
like
no bearing on the
clarifying that.
proposition at hand, right?
No, it
I
absolutely
for
does.
But I
the
also-
sake of discussion, even grant that, and it still doesn't prove all trans women are women, because we understand that 99.2% of trans individuals do not have an intersex condition and were correctly assigned at birth. So I don't think it would prove anything but the 0.8%.
Well, not correctly assigned, but like, but the point is that if no definition works, then we, especially if no definition works on like a descriptive level, then we definitely have, then like for sure the only thing we can back up to is utility, and the self-ID view has way greater utility than any other proposed model.
Wait, an intersex condition? Yeah, that's sex, not gender.
Another better way of putting this question would be, what is the best way to define the word woman? Because again, it's one where both have to present a position. The mere negation position is doing a lot of work for Sanvi here, and it's kind of shameless how much she's just like, yeah, I don't have to prove anything. Well, you kind of do, because you're taking a position in as much as you're pretending you're not.
So, okay.
Well, right. So the burden is still to prove the 99% of trans women are they women.
Yes, because of the internal perception.
Well, now,
which
if you're setting the bar at like the 99% thing, because before you were doing the Dr. Bogardus thing, if we can find one exception or whatever. Now like if you want to prove that he's wrong, you have to go out like, do you want to like start crunching numbers on like what percentage meet this criteria or whatever else? By the way, the self-ID view, 100% of trans women identify as women. It works 100% of the time. So, yeah, like your circularity thing is something we can easily tear apart, even though you'll never listen. But the self-ID view works.
is encompassing, not to mention the fact that we recognize internal perceptions like, in other aspects of society as well. Since the current definition, here's the thing, is you say that even if your current definition is disproven, it doesn't prove trans women are women. That's true, by the way, 100%. However,
Correct.
in order to further make the point, we need to compare the definition to the current definition. And if we're looking at, there's this definition of which includes trans women being women and serves more utility. and is more encompassing, versus the current definition, which is based on biology, doesn't serve utility, and excludes people that we would currently view as being women.
So what would you take like severely cognitively disabled adult human females to be? Like they lack the parts of the brain. Take hydroanencephaly, severe traumatic brain injury, like whatever.
So she mentioned, I've heard her mention this before. There are a couple of answers to this. First, you can immediately go to, well, you can go with whatever they identified with when they were able to identify themselves, and then at the point, but if they would like never were, if they were never able to identify, then in what sense do they have a gender? With what we mean by with the understanding that sex and gender are different things, and they are, the only people who assert there aren't are basically like anti-trans people. Like the only people who say they're the same thing are people who are who actively need them to be the same so that they can delegitimize trans people. But is like that sex and gender are different things. If someone is never cognitively able to identify with a particular gender, in what sense are they a given like any gender? It seems like they wouldn't be. There you go. And in what sense would it be necessary for me to gender them? Like, there's no like relevant impact to that of like, am I gonna misgender this person? Like, I mean, maybe, but like, there's no harm. Are they gonna have their political rights changed? Probably not. They're not cognitively able to do anything, right?
They lack the parts of the brain to have that internal
Also,
reflection of themselves if they
Like
align
someone in
with
like a
masculine or
coma, you
feminine.
mean? Like
also like
What was that?
maybe they're just
like someone in a
non-binary,
coma?
right?
like a woman in a coma.
If they
That
don't
could be-
identify with either gender, then they would be non-binary, right? Like they would not be a man or a woman. That's one of the things that non-binary can mean.
One thing, but like let's say from birth even, right? Like
Right, and so yeah, so they obviously would not have an internal perception of themselves.
of anything.
The same-
of
So
much
they'd be
else at all,
non-binary.
yeah.
Yeah, no,
Because
it would be a
non-binary
societal
identity
thing, and
is
in that element, they would
is
probably
legitimate.
be a girl or a woman, and it would just be we would look at their genitalia, and then we would have the correlation.
I
of
think that's the wrong
social
approach there.
external properties that we.
I don't know. I don't know
classify,
what Hunter's
and
thoughts
then
are on
that's that. Just
non-binary
like you might
identity.
take, well, hold on. Just like you might take this person to church, and they're not going to have an internal perception or belief system of being a Christian. But what does this prove?
Oh, okay. I do like his approach here, right? Like you can, like maybe we would treat them in this particular way, but that is an imposition. That is not. That is us doing something like because like we need it, not because they need it, or because is accurate to them. It's because it's something that like we do for our sake. Um, I don't fully agree with, like obviously I think you should just be like, well then they'd be non-binary, um but if you are not going to do that, then I think this is a reasonable approach.
Nothing that they're not Christian.
Right. So in the case of the internal
regardless,
perception, they can. Yeah,
By
so they
your
might not
logic,
have an internal
should,
identity.
They
In
cannot.
that case, they
They
wouldn't.
cannot be women.
Okay.
Yeah, they
Cool.
You're right. They
Yeah,
wouldn't be
sure.
a woman
Yeah,
based
they're
on the
non-binary.
identification side of
What
things.
but what
So
harm
They'd
does
be
would
this?
they
female,
be
and then they would be a
agender?
woman based on the.
Or
social
agender might be
group.
another way of
We
putting
would
it. Yeah.
probably categorize them as a woman.
But
Just
do
like
you realize that this is special pleading from the original definition? Because the
No.
original definition was a
What?
woman is somebody whose internal perception aligns with what we culturally
No,
view as feminine.
no, he's
Which, if
saying
we're
that
gonna
that person
throw out
would
this
not be a
because
woman.
They don't have that capacity for an.
What? No, it's not special pleading whatsoever. He has said they are not a woman, even if they are treated that way, because their internal perception isn't that way. Now, if they had an internal perception as being a woman or as being a man, and they're like being considered a woman would be misgendering, then we would be in a different position now, wouldn't we? We're talking about someone who would not have any internal perception of their own gender, assuming that's possible. And if that's the case, then no, they're not women, and that does not violate at all his perception. The only way this gets weird is if you insist also that there are exactly two genders and all people fit into one of the two, which is also inaccurate.
Internal perception at all, then you would have to be refining the definition to include a second definition, which is a social aspect. But it's still a shift of what the original definition was.
Okay, so what's your overall point then here?
You shifted the original definition because
No,
the
he
original
didn't.
definition of a woman was somebody whose internal perception aligns with what we culturally view as feminine. And now you're saying even if somebody doesn't have an internal perception of anything at all,
They might be
they could still be a woman
treated
under
as a
X
woman.
definition.
No,
which is
they'll be.
different from the one that
He
you originally
he
said.
explicitly
Okay,
said that
sure.
they would not be a
So
woman, but they would be
wouldn't be a
treated.
woman,
Yeah,
yes,
he's saying it
in
again.
the sense of they would not have an internal perception of themselves. If they're cognitively to the ability of not able to like have really a sense of self, then yes, of course. But this is also like saying a Christian is somebody who has an internal belief system. That person might not be a Christian if you take this mentally deficient person to church, but you could still impose those social things.
And there's another approach, another like. By the way, she says special pleading. Sometimes definitions have multiple definitions. Like, look, art has two things. Words have multiple definitions, rather, not definitions. So you could say, just like, like if you took the same person and asked, are they a Christian? If they have no Christian beliefs but like go to church and whatever, in some sense, no, they're not a Christian in as much as they do not hold the beliefs a Christian would be required to hold, but they are a Christian in as much as they are doing Christianity. If they are going to church and like go and like saying the prayers and doing whatever other things Christians are supposed to do, like the Eucharist or whatever. In the same way that this person with no self-perception, maybe if they engage in womanhood, in like doing what women are expected to do and actually do, even if they have no self-perception of that, internal self-perception, then it would be that they are doing womanhood, right? And thereby are a woman. That's not, you like, she might call it special pleading, but it's just like uncharitability. Sometimes there are different ways of approaching this thing. The question I would have is whether they identify with a woman. If they're literally incapable of identifying, then maybe not. And then maybe they're not a woman, but then they're like, maybe they're doing womanhood, or maybe more accurately, they are non-binary but they present very feminine. That's a thing that people who are cool with trans people say. Like, that's not weird.
So they might not be a woman, again, based on the standard of an internal identity, but we would probably still, what I'm saying is, refer to them as a woman because we would, in that case, impose these expectations.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So it's that.
Just if they don't have the internal perception, we would still impose it and probably assume it in them.
Okay, so in addition to a woman being somebody with the internal perception of what we view as feminine, a woman is also somebody that we impose female expectations onto, in addition to that.
No, I'm saying we would consider that person a woman.
The people who are treated as women are people who have that imposed on them.
Under your definition, they would be agender.
Right. So
well, he's because he's acknowledging what you seem unwilling to, which is that society behaves in ways towards people. Like like if we're talking about in a purely neutral society that behaves completely in line with someone's self-identification, and that's like how we determine gender, and which then no, they wouldn't even be treated like a woman. They would be treated as agender or non-binary or whatever. Or unless they identified as a woman, even if they didn't internally feel like I don't understand how that could possibly happen. But we're also in like wacky territory of like, do people like this exist? I'm not even sure.
Let me explain here once again. You understand that I have already conceded that gender and sex are correlated, correct? Sure. So I recognize that there is an external element of gender, right, which influences the internal perception. They would fit in the external part because they have no cognitive ability to form a sense of self. Honestly, you're right. They would be agender. They would not have a gender. But I'm saying we would all the same refer to them as a woman. Not that they actually.
Fine. That's
no,
fine.
Not that they. Please, I feel like you think that this is like a gotcha when I'm just trying.
I never said it was a gotcha. You clarified your point. It makes sense.
We might refer to them as a woman.
Yeah, we might refer to them for the sake of like our simplicity.
Categorize them as that.
Okay, so she does get it. So where's the problem?
There's a difference between analytically and pragmatically, right? So pragmatically, we might refer to them as a woman for like social reasons,
and he has said multiple times that analytically, no, they would not be a woman.
But you would agree that analytically, they are agender.
Yes, correct, and that has no problems with his. And that has absolutely no problem with his.
Just like you might say, like, oh,
that presents no problem to his definition.
They love Jesus. They might say something like that, but like they don't really have that internal perception. They might not really understand. This doesn't mean that at the end of the day, a Christian is someone who has an internal belief.
Yeah. Okay. So
like that person wouldn't be a Christian, just the same as that person might not be a woman, but we would still impose those roles and expectations most likely. And also most likely just refer to them as such.
I still think that the more so the problem is under this view, Anybody that is severely cognitively disabled or handicapped lacks a gender, analytically at least. They
No,
lack
so
a
this is
No,
this is the
no, because you remember you had to provide like a very weird case of that, of like if someone could not have an internal self-perception. Most cases of cognitive disability do not preclude the ability for internal self-perception for the person who has that disability. And in as much as it does, then, well, yeah, in what sense are they any given gender if they have no self-perception? If they identify as such, then they would like this is where I'm like coming back with like my perspective as opposed to Hunter's. That like well if they identify then there we go. And if they are so cognitively impaired that they are unable to identify or engage in gender, then in what way are they that gender for real? Like actually, yeah, some people are agender. That's a thing.
So this is the coma argument. You have a little bit of a stronger argument when you're talking about someone who might be born mentally deficient. If you're talking about someone in a coma,
I didn't
that's
mention a
an-
coma. I said handicapped and disability.
No, but like
As if
yeah,
they
you
were
say
born-
handicapped and disabled, but like like if someone's handicapped because and like in that like I don't know they like I can't think of like a good example, but like in a very minor way, and they still have a self perception, then like no, they have not lost the ability to have a gender. In order to sufficiently lose cognitive ability to be able to identify in this way, it would have to be pretty extreme. That's why he's talking about comas. So like yes, you didn't say a coma, but like that's really the only the that's really the only like obvious way that you could be like only obvious thing you could be talking about
or with a
where this would
handicap,
apply.
or as if they were.
Yeah,
the-
like take certain genetic disorders, for example, like severe chromosomal abnormalities that cause a high end of Down syndrome.
Mhm.
Things like that, more so. That would mean that everybody that meets that threshold of lacking assertive self-awareness would lack a gender.
Okay.
Just like they would lack any
Sure.
sense of self or identity.
Yeah,
Yes.
so
Sure.
they
They
are
would
a
lack in.
gender.
Why is that a problem?
They would lack a form of identity.
I don't know why he's fighting this. Yeah, why is that a problem?
Because you've been asking a lot of questions. I want to ask you some questions now. Do you understand how identity works in relation to the external social constructs?
I think so. Yeah, I think I understand your definition of it.
Right. So do you understand that if somebody is really mentally cognitively deficient, they're not going to be able to form an identity in regards to really anything?
Yeah, so they would lack a gender, is what I'm saying. I don't see
Yes.
you saying
So,
anything contrary.
so you're not making a point. You're just
Right.
reiterating that they would lack a gender. Yes, they would.
Yeah, I don't think he's like yeah, I think he's got the right idea but is not addressing it appropriately of like yes. Just like yeah, but that's like if what you're saying is true, it's not a problem, but you're presenting it as though it is one.
But they wouldn't have
Well,
an
it's a
identity. Yeah.
problem
They would
under-
also lack a sense of self. That doesn't mean a
Yeah.
sense of self is generally an internal perception you have of, I don't know, in regards to yourself, whatever.
Yeah, and
Like,
another problem with this is that would mean, and before you please let me finish this. Analytically, that infants would lack a gender too, because
Yes.
now you can say that we impose it on them for
Correct.
pragmatic
Yep.
reasons to refer to them as boys and girls. But that would still mean that because they lack the capacity to internally perceive themselves as XYZ, they would be a gender as well. That means everybody is born a gender.
Correct.
technically,
Yes.
and
Mhm. Yeah, so I want you to notice how she's approaching what she's saying. The distinction between her approach and what she said. Because she said another problem is this thing that isn't a problem whatsoever. What's wrong with like I don't understand what issue there is with the paradigm to say, yeah, infants would be incapable of having a self-perception of gender, so they would be agender, and maybe we pragmatically impose a gender, but that doesn't mean that that is their gender. And this is why it comes to be that people come out as trans, or like because they are treated as a gender that does not conform with their own self-perception. But before that, they didn't have a self-perception that was at odds with the way they were treated, especially as infants. But she's saying this is like it's a problem. It's not a problem. It's a description of reality.
just refer to them as girls and boys for pragmatic reasons.
yes. That's
Okay.
what I'm
Yep.
talking about with the external socialization that we correlate with sex.
Oh, and this is something in like in tone. It's like a minor, very very minor nitpick that I've seen from Hunter is that sometimes he struggles with dialing down the. I don't want to say anger because he's not really angry, but like the sound of like I guess like the sound of anger in his voice, or like the enthusiasm, because while there's nothing wrong from an argumentative sense, it would be better like it comes off, at least to my mind, as a lot stronger and a lot more confident, and a lot, and like in a way, in like in a peripheral sense, supporting your argument better. Just be like, yes, to just be very calm, like yeah, that's all correct. But when you seem a little more riled, and it's just a matter of like being engaged, right? He's not like, I'm not saying, oh, he's just like triggered and angry. I mean, just he's engaged and energized by the debate that he's having. I feel like it comes off as more like, what she's saying is bothering me, even though there's no problems. Yeah.
And what I'm saying is that that's unnecessary. It's it no longer includes women, people you would consider women based on biology, the sexual characteristics.
Did you agree with what I said?
Yes, and he said so.
An infant would technically be agender. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you can literally you can look up how the socialization of gender can take place a lot of the times. And again, I'm not saying this is some like conspiratorial, like, let me make my child, whatever. Like,
no, we do this unconsciously. It's also, I mean, I'm not a parent, so I can't say this like definitively, but it seems like it would be much harder to try to raise your kid like completely gender neutrally. Yeah, it's just like we do it on accident. It happens all the time.
A subtle
it's not a conspiracy
thing. Yeah, I have 2 kids, so I've seen it happen.
Oh, that's right.
Myself.
He has kids.
It happens. It's everywhere. But yeah, absolutely. But there's also strong evidence showing that by the time a kid is, I think he's like 6 or 7, they already have a pretty strong sense of gender and themselves in regards to that. So yeah, gender is a form of identity in regards to a social
and
construct,
children often struggle to find their identity, and like and it definitely, like, would you say an infant, like, well, this is, I mean, maybe religious people would have more issues with this. Like, would you say an infant is a Christian? A lot of people do, but like, do they really believe any of the things, or like identify with any of the aspects, or like even do Christianity? Not really, right? It's ascribed to them, and in the same way we do this with gender, right? They're not, like, they don't really have that, and people have argued that it's kind of pernicious that we impose like a religious identity on children. Well, maybe more and more we can ease off on both doing that and on imposing a gendered expectation on children.
Identity in regards to social constructs.
Let them be themselves.
I'm giving you examples of where this applies here.
Yeah,
and so far you haven't really made an argument or a rebuttal. You're just saying, so based
right,
on
you've
your
just
definition,
observed aspects of his paradigm.
I'm conceding, but like, so what's your argument?
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that in the discussion.
I think he's a little bit like, there's a little bit of like he's slightly flustered at the, like, you're calling this it's the thing I observed before, right? She said another problem and then laid out a thing that's not a problem in any way, nor did she even imply what the problem would be, just stated it was a problem. Definitely did not make an argument about what the problem is with infants being agender. Yeah, that's fine.
Are all trans men women? Under your definition, we'd have these XYZ implications. Now you can.
Well, okay, so this might be a good place to cut it, because we're getting like close to 2.5 hours. It's usually about how long I go, and it seems like we're gonna proceed on to another point. But like, when she's saying like there might be these implications, like, well, but there's no negative implication for children being agender, right? Unless you want to say like there are trans infants, in which case no, they're not. I don't know what to tell you. We'll play for a couple more seconds just to make sure they go on to another subject, and if they do, we'll cut here, and then we'll pick this up tomorrow. But otherwise, we'll finish out the topic.
So you're fine with those implications, but I think the majority of people would say like, we're not born agender.
Oh, people might say that, but they're wrong. Like, okay, like people say lots of things. I don't know. Like, it was like less than 20 years ago that for the first time ever, 50% of Americans said they believe in the theory of evolution by natural selection. People say all sorts of things. That doesn't make them right. What? This is a very blatant appeal to it's a argument ad populum.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
people
but
can
that
people
was
can
just
say what they
kind of
want,
why.
but
That's
again,
kind
it's
of why
like
I was asking
this is the
that,
thing
not
is
as a
is
gotcha. I was just trying to
I
understand
mean,
if that was something you were willing to
so
like
I'm gonna say
concede
what
to.
you
That's all.
said earlier is just if something is does just if my definition is not all encompassing and you can find a couple exceptions, doesn't mean that trans women are not are a woman is someone whose internal perception aligns with what we culturally view as being feminine. It doesn't negate my definition. And if you're going to say that because
yeah, like that argument was basically like people disagree with your definition. Therefore it's wrong. Like what?
when I bring up the fact that your definition
I'm actually glad for something like this because Sanvi is like an instance where we see the same kinds of like academic arguments, but with like without as much of the polish of the like the professor types, where like she'll just do something like that, like this argument ad populum, just like blatantly like here's this like absurd blatant dishonesty that was a little harder to find with Dr. Bogardus. Don't get me wrong, I think they're both extremely dishonest, but though maybe not necessarily trying to be. I think it's just it's a lot of motivated reasoning and like incorrect approaches to stuff. But I hope that helps dispel the illusion of like that when someone presents in this very like logical academic way that necessarily means that they know what they're talking about and they're approaching things correctly.
is even less serves
Please
even
get to
less
like the
utility
end of this
and
topic
is
and get to the next
far
one.
less encompassing than mine, then you're right that it doesn't prove trans
Actually,
women are
that's
women.
actually
It's
where he started
less.
talking
You're
here.
going to say that feminine. It doesn't. You can find a couple exceptions. Something is does just
Something you were willing.
Okay, actually, that's a good place to start because he's leading on. It sounds like he's leading into an issue with her definition, which remember is relevant. As much as she wants to act like she can just take the mere negation and then like we're just left with nothing, but you're definitely wrong. That's not correct at all. Like we're talking about definitions, what encapsulates a term, and this is an ought question masquerading as an is question, right? So it's not just like, oh, you're wrong and therefore we do nothing. There are ramifications and whether things ought to be, how ought we define these terms, and she has an alternative proposal as much as she's trying not to defend it and acting like she doesn't have to. This is a little bit of like hiding behind the format of a debate that is happening here. But we'll pick up with this tomorrow. I'm glad we got into this. I'm glad we're splitting it up because we're 42 minutes in and we've already been at this for about 2 hours. But this is really interesting. I'm glad we're going over it. A lot of interesting stuff to talk about. I hope that you all in chat are getting stuff out of this. I enjoyed how wacky people were getting in chat. Oh my! And I hope to see you back tomorrow because we'll finish up with it. Hopefully, I really don't want to do this over the course of 3 days. So tomorrow we'll finish up with this. And until then, have a good day. Take care of yourselves. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, do all the other stuff. As we established last week, in case you weren't here or in case you had forgotten, it is a violation of my free speech for you to not like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends. That's actually like a First Amendment violation. You might get sued for that. This is not legal advice. That all being said, thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you next time. Have a good one. Bye.